Mr. Speaker. Another day, another attack against Canadians from the Conservative Party of Canada. Anytime someone steps up who disagrees with their vision for Canada, what do? Personal attacks, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve better than the slogans and personal attacks that we get from Conservative members of Parliament. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Regina Capel.
The attacks on this government's economic record are coming from inside the Liberals' own cabinet, Mr. Speaker. And it looks more and more like Carbon Tax Carney's plan to push out the Prime Minister is working as well, too. For Carbon Tax Carney, it's always been profits over people. Look at his record. Since he became the top economic advisor to the PM, he's moved his own company's headquarters to New York City. He got caught unethically lobbying the UK government. And his firm Brookfield is now looking for $10 billion in taxpayers' money for a new investment fund, which would be managed by Brookfield, his own company. Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve better than this government in shambles. Why not call a carbon tax election and let Canadians decide for themselves?
The honourable leader of the government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is the people's house, and in it we should be debating things that are pertinent to the administration of government. But what we hear from the House Leader from the Conservative Party of Canada is attacks on Canadians, Mr. Speaker. The person he is talking about is not a sitting member of Parliament, is not a cabinet minister. It is someone that they are attacking simply because they do not share their vision of Canada. Mr. Speaker, every single Canadian deserves better than what we hear from the opposition today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Stormont Dundas, South Glengarry.
The Prime Minister's lost control hours before delivering a fiscal update. The Finance Minister resigned, joining 1/5 of the Liberal caucus and saying she doesn't have confidence in the Prime Minister either. And there's only one person left keeping this Prime Minister in power, and that's the leader of the NDP. The fall budget is scheduled to be tabled in 54 minutes, and we don't even know who the Finance Minister is. The Liberals' own cabinet order on succession states if it's not her, it's the Industry Minister, but he says he doesn't want to. So that means it's supposed to go to the disgraced member from Edmonton Centre. The question is, will the other Randy be Canada's next finance minister? And how much is he investing in fraud?
Again, I've asked members to please not do indirectly what they can't do directly by referring to a member by their first name. The honourable leader, order. The honourable leader of the government in the House of Commons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, all we see from Conservative members of Parliament is personal attacks and mudslinging against Canadians. Mr. Speaker, what we all need to be doing right now is standing united for our country, making sure that we are protecting the Canadian economy, Canadian jobs, and making things a little bit easier for Canadians. We look forward to presenting the fall economic statement later this afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax West.
Speaker, our government takes the safety of children seriously. That's why we put forward a comprehensive plan to bring Canada into the 21st century and change our online world, making it safer for kids and better for all. The Conservatives are blocking the plan and they're standing in the way of a better future for our kids online. Parents want the Online Harms Act. Experts want the Online Harms Act. Can the Minister of Justice explain why C-63 must be passed to keep our kids safe?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, last week I asked for unanimous consent to split the Online Harms Act and advance the child protection measures as soon as possible. Every single party got on board except for the Conservatives. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative Party said no to forcing the removal of child sexual abuse material from the internet. They said no to Amanda Todd's mother, Carol. They said no to Rehtaeh Parsons' mother and all the other parents who are begging us to act. While Conservative inaction keeps child sexual abuse material online, on this side of the House, the government will continue to fight for victims, parents, and kids to keep them safe.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. The Prime Minister has completely lost the plot. He's lost control of immigration, of our borders, of public finances. He's also lost the confidence of 20 or 40 members of his caucus. He's lost the confidence and trust of his right-hand woman, the former Minister of Finance. The Prime Minister has lost everything. Will he finally let go and trigger an election so that Canadians can take back control of their future? The Honourable Minister for Innovation, rather. Mr. Speaker, I am not a new minister of anything. Period is deplorable. Canadians who are watching us today expect better from the official opposition. Now is the time to work together to defend our country, to be ready for the next US administration. It's disappointing to see that the opposition is playing political games on a day like today. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, I can't quite believe what I just heard from the Minister for well, not the Minister for Finance, he said no, but the Minister for Innovation. The Minister is out of control. His former right-hand woman was very striking in her letter. We have to preserve our fiscal capacity against the United States. It's pursuing a policy of aggressive economic nationalism. We need to recognize the gravity of the moment. The situation is dire. Canadians need to work. So what do we need? The Honourable Minister for Labour and Seniors. Mr. Speaker, it's not by shouting slogans that this member will claim to create unity in our country. Our government has a serious plan to move forward. We will, through our full economic statement, provide for prosperity for all Canadians, and we will be here to protect Canadians against any potential threat.
The Honourable Member for Peterborough-Kawartha.
The Prime Minister is spiraling so bad, and his obsession for power is dangerous. It's actually dangerous, and it is killing people every day. In Peterborough, and the Peterborough and area families are suffering the greatest rates of food insecurity ever recorded. Do you know what food insecurity means, Mr. Speaker? Starvation, hunger, children. Enough. This is as serious as it gets. The finance minister quit hours before she was supposed to do this, and she doesn't have confidence in this prime minister. No one does. This man is a disgrace, and we need an election now.
Ask member, please, to be very judicious in referring to any member in this place. Order. Order. The Honourable Minister for Families, Children and Social Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On this side of the House, we've made investments to ensure that Canadians, including those in Peterborough-Kawartha, have the support that they need, whether that be through affordable childcare, whether that be through an HST holiday, Mr. Speaker. The people of Peterborough-Kawartha can rely on us, can know that we on this side of the House will fight for them when their Member of Parliament will do everything they can to oppose these supports.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver Quadra.
Mr. Speaker, children in Canada are just not safe online. Our government wants to join the many countries that have now adopted online safety regulations. Yet the Conservatives are preventing our Online Harms Act from moving forward. In fact, shockingly, they're blocking our efforts to remove child sex abuse material from the internet. How disgusting. Can the Justice Minister please describe the importance of Bill C-63 to parents and children, and explain why Canadians so urgently need this law now? Good question.
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, the online harms bill is the product of 4 years of consultation. It is comprehensive legislation that will remove child sex abuse material from the internet. By blocking that very act, the Conservatives have made a clear choice that they will not prioritize the safety of our kids. They don't stand with parents. Amanda Todd's mother, Carol, said she's been waiting 12 years for this type of change. We need to pass this legislation to do right by Carol and every other parent of every other child who suffered abuse online. The question for Canadians and for that party is, will they stand with us and keep kids safe? Yes.
The honourable member for North Island Powell River.
The marriage after 60 pension clause is dated, sexist, and unfair. All parties agree it should be eliminated. But the Liberals have sat on their hands and let veterans and their spouses down. The Liberals' former deputy leader said it best: Canadians can tell when the government is focused on themselves and not on real people. And failing to remove this clause proves it. When will the Liberals stop labeling women gold diggers and get rid of this archaic, sexist clause?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister for Veterans Affairs.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for her question and also take a moment to thank the members of the Canadian Armed Forces for their service. Mr. Speaker, when a person serves in the military, we all recognize that their family serves with them. Our government is sensitive to the situation of widowed spouses who have married veterans after the age of 60. And our government is committed to improving and supporting members of their family as we move forward. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my last question in 2024, I think of the IPCC report. I'm sorry.
Yes, I mean, colleagues, really. I'd like to just hear the Honourable Member. She's at the far end of the room. It's difficult for me to hear, and I would like her to please start again. The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my last question in 2024, I think of the IPCC 6th assessment report that if we do not globally reduce emissions dramatically, peak before and see dramatic reductions at the latest, this is quote, at the latest before 2025, we will shoot way past the Paris Agreement targets, way past 2 degrees Celsius, and face climate disaster. I think of the words in that film, The Age of Stupid. What were we thinking? To avoid the opportunity to save ourselves when we had the chance. Can the Honourable Minister give us any excuse, but perhaps this question period answers its own question?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable colleague for her question. I would like to remind her that everything we've done since we've been in power in 2015 has meant a 43% decline in emissions in Canada, Mr. Speaker. Greenhouse gas emissions are at their lowest level in 25 years, 27 years, in fact, Mr. Speaker. Our plan is working. We're helping the economy, we're creating jobs, and we're fighting pollution.
To leave the chamber quietly so that I can hear what the honourable members depositing.
I do have a few things I'd like to say that are very wonderful about the future. Ready to go? Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 36.8A, I have the honour to table in both official languages the government's responses to 46 petitions. These returns will be tabled in an electronic format.
Introduction of government bills. Déclaration des ministres. Rapport de délégation.
Reports from interparliamentary delegations.
Presenting reports from committees. The honourable member for Humber River, Black Creek.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I truly have the honour today, as we get into the end of 2024, to present in both official languages the 23rd report of the Standing Committee on International Trade, entitled Canada's Supply Chain and Expanded International Trade, challenges and measures for 2024 and as we move into the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Fleetwood Port Kells.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the honor to present in both official languages the 9th interim report of the Special Committee on the Canada-China People's Republic of China relationship, entitled Canada's Indo-Pacific Strategy 2 years later. Our diplomatic, economic and military presence is valued in the region, and we're making investments in long-term relationships that will be very beneficial for Canada and that region in years to come. Pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests that the government table a comprehensive response to this report.
The honourable member for Mississauga-Malton.
I have the honor to present in both official languages the 16th report of the Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security in relation to the motion adopted on October 23rd, 2023, regarding the growing problem of car thefts in Canada. Thank you very much.
I understand that the official opposition can be presenting a dissenting report. The honourable member from Kildonan and St. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to put on the record that Conservatives of Public Safety Committee have included a dissenting report on the Public Safety National Security Committee auto theft report. We heard a lot of testimony from police that this government's soft on crime measures have increased auto thefts in this country. We need tougher bail measures. We need tougher criminal code sentencing penalties for those responsible for auto theft. Conservatives have brought forward repeated measures to do so, voted down by this Liberal government. It's very clear, Mr. Speaker, and we've reflected this in our dissenting report, that the only way we're going to get less auto thefts in this country is if a Conservative majority government comes into power and brings in those criminal code changes to toughen up our measures and ensure the people responsible for stealing cars are put behind bars. That's what's going to happen if a Conservative government comes into power. We've reflected this in our dissenting report, Mr. Speaker. I'm very proud to contribute that to the public safety report on auto thefts. Thank you.
Here. All right. Oh, I see that Mr. Dubourg, I see that the honourable member from Bourassa has his hand up. L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Bourassa.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have two reports to table. First of all, I have the honour to table in both official languages the 17th report of the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs, entitled Supplementary Estimates B, 2024-25, votes 1B and 5B, under Department of Veterans Affairs. And the second report, Mr. Speaker.
To present in both official languages the 18th report of the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs, entitled The Persian Gulf War Was a War. Pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests that the government table a comprehensive response to this report. Thank you, Chair.
I thank the honourable member. I believe that the official opposition will present a dissenting report.
The honourable member for Moose Jaw, Lake Centre, Lanigan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to table this supplementary report with the House to ensure that the voices of veterans are heard. Over the course of the study in the Standing Committee on Veterans Affairs, we heard from many different veterans, particularly from veterans who served in the war in Afghanistan, who continue to be ignored and disrespected by this Liberal government. The committee agreed to study the designation of wartime service, which extends beyond just veterans who fought in the Persian Gulf War. In fact, even veterans who fought in the Persian Gulf raised this point several times. Yet the report tabled in the committee completely neglected to mention even a single veteran who fought in Afghanistan. Veterans put their lives on the line in combat and graciously agreed to travel to Ottawa and share their experiences with the committee, so we owe it to them to include the wisdom they shared with us. Mr. Speaker, common sense Conservatives want to make it clear that we are listening to veterans, and we won't let this Liberal government and their NDP allies to continue to ignore their concerns. Thank you.
Thank the honourable member. Introduction of private members' bills. First reading of Senate public bills. Mr. Baker, seconded by Mr. Maloney, moves that Bill C-276, an act respecting Ukrainian Heritage Month, be now read a first time. The honourable member for Etobicoke Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to introduce in this House Bill S-276, an act respecting Ukrainian Heritage Month. This bill has passed the Senate, and if passed here in the House, the bill will declare September of every year Ukrainian Heritage Month. I'd like to thank the member for Etobicoke Lakeshore for co-sponsoring this bill with me, and I hope members of all parties will support this bill. The first Ukrainian immigrants to Canada came on September 7th, 1891, and today there are approximately 1.4 million Canadians of Ukrainian descent. They have made an important impact on their country. It spans coast to coast to coast, whether that be economic, social, political, or economic life. At the same time, Canada has welcomed and supported Ukrainian Canadians. Canada was the first country to recognize Ukraine's independence. Canada has recognized the Holodomor as a genocide, and Canada has been a global leader in supporting the Ukrainian people in their fight against Russia's brutal invasion, and we have said that we will stand with the Ukrainian people until they win. Ukrainian Heritage Month would offer a special opportunity for us to celebrate Ukrainian heritage, the role Canada has played in supporting Ukrainian Canadians, and the contributions that Ukrainian Canadians have made and continue to make to Canada. Slava Kanadi, Slava Ukraini!
Героям слава! This motion is deemed adopted.
First reading of this bill, première lecture de ce projet de loi.
When shall this motion be read a second time? At the next sitting of the House. Motions. Motion. Présentation des pétitions.
Presenting petitions.
L'honorable député d'Algoma-Manitoulin.
The honourable member for Algoma-Manitoulin-Kapuskasing.
I stand once again in this House to table a petition signed by residents of Wikwimikong unceded territory and surrounding area calling on the Government of Canada to assist in the funding required to build a new elders facility in Wikwimikong. The petitioners note that they have received funding from the Government of Ontario, CMHC, and from community members, but there is a funding shortfall of $20 million. They draw to the Government of Canada's attention that it has funded healthcare facilities largely in the Indigenous community of Moosonee, a long-term care home for Mohawks of Quinte, and a seniors long-term care facility in Rankin Inlet. They add that the current facility in Wikwimikong has reached the end of its life expectancy, and it's vital for the community to ensure that elders can stay in their community to not only share their knowledge and experience with younger generations and remain close to their families, but also not to be subjected to another era of assimilation. Mr. Speaker, I have one more petition. Actually, there's several of these petitions. So I stand to table a petition signed by residents of Northern Ontario who are calling on the House of Commons to recognize the impact that reducing the number of electoral districts in the region following the report of the Federal Electoral Boundaries Commission will have on their electoral representation. They ask that the federal government modify the Electoral Boundaries Readjustment Act to ensure that the number of electoral districts in Northern Ontario are maintained at 10. The petitioners also ask that this House respect the Supreme Court of Canada's 1991 Carter decision that states effective representation and good government in this country compel that factors other than voter parity, such as geography and community of interest, be taken into account in setting electoral boundaries. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Dauphin Swan River, Nipola.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's always an honor to present a petition on behalf of constituents. Mr. Speaker, I rise for the 56th time on behalf of the people of Swan River, Manitoba, to present a petition on the rising rate of crime. The community of Swan River is struggling with the rising rate of crime in their area. Statistics Canada reports that after 9 years of this Liberal government, violent crime has risen by 50% and gang-related homicides have nearly doubled. Within the last 5 years, the crime severity index in Swan River has increased by over 50%. According to the RCMP, 4 individuals in Swan River alone were responsible for 309 total offenses, 53 of which were violent offenses over the course of 18 months. This is why people of Swan River are demanding jail, not bail, for violent repeat offenders. Mr. Speaker, the people of Swan River demand that this Liberal government repeal their soft on crime policies that directly threaten their livelihoods and their community. I support the good people of Swan River.
Here, here. Great people.
The honourable member for Nanaimo, Lady Smith. I'm sorry, for Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I rise today in a petition around affordable housing, as successive Liberal and Conservative governments have been neglected investing in affordable housing for decades, and predatory landlords have been able to take advantage of the vulnerabilities. The average rent in Coquitlam, in my riding of Coquitlam, for a 2-bedroom apartment has reached $2,900. Corporate landlords are increasingly using rent evictions and demo evictions to demolish affordable housing. So the undersigned ask for the government to impose a moratorium on rent evictions and other forms of displacing tenants, invest in affordable housing, nonprofit and co-op housing, and stop providing billions of dollars in handouts to corporate landlords who are buying up existing affordable housing, evicting people, and raising rents.
The honourable member for Winnipeg North.
So thank you, Mr. Speaker. Especially, I table a petition of individuals in Canada that are very much concerned about foreign interference. They make reference to issues of murder, extortion, political interference. And what they're calling for, Mr. Speaker, is that the leader of the Conservative Party get the security clearance that's necessary so that he can actually be more aware in terms of the degree in which foreign interference is playing a very significant role here in Canada, Mr. Speaker. It's a petition in which many have signed, and I would encourage members to take a look at the petition itself. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for St. Albert, Edmonton.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to present a petition. The petitioners are calling on the Liberals to permanently scrap their reckless planned expansion of MAID, where mental illness is a sole underlying disorder. Petitioners note that vulnerable persons would be put at unique risk because it is difficult, if not impossible, to determine irremediability, meaning persons who could get better could have their lives prematurely ended. And secondly, that it is difficult, if not impossible, to distinguish between a rational request for MAID and one motivated by suicidal ideation, where the request is in the context of sole underlying mental illness.
The honourable member for Windsor West.
I rise today to table 2 petitions. The first is with regards to 500 concerned citizens and workers from across Canada. They are calling on the government to take immediate action to protect workers from the growing misuse of non-disclosure agreements, or NDAs, in the case of harassment, violence, and discrimination. NDAs are increasingly used to force workers into silence, preventing them from seeking help or speaking out about mistreatment and misconduct in the workplace. This is increasingly true for workers in low-wage or precarious employment situation. The petitioners calls for legislation that would ban the misuse of NDAs by the federal government and federally funded agencies unless specifically requested by a worker who has received legal advice on alternative ways to protect their privacy. This is a crucial step to protect workers, especially those in vulnerable situations, and ensure they are not silenced or forced to live in fear. I urge all members to support this petition. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my second petition, Mr. Speaker, is actually a good news story. It's supporting, again, the calling of the banning of nuclear waste management organization in South Bruce. Despite the fact that we have had a good positive decision as of November 28th, the final decision was made to actually choose an alternative location in Northern Ontario for nuclear waste disposal. The petitioners still want this government to have a proper process in place. The petitioners are concerned about the transportation, processing, burial, and abandonment of close to 1,200 tons of nuclear waste that would remain radioactive for 100,000 years. And they are calling for this to be actually reviewed and mandated through legislation and through law, because the process that was taken through South Bruce was dysfunctional for the community. And again, Mr. Speaker, the community has fought back and won this fight for themselves and their families and the future of our country, and protecting the Great Lakes waterway, which has been asked for repeatedly over these number of years. Thank you.
Okay. The honourable member for Kelowna Lake Country, followed by the honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Mr. Speaker, I'm rising today to table the petition on behalf of residents from Kelowna Lake Country and surrounding region. And to summarize, the residents state that due to bureaucratic impediment to passport issuance and unavailable consular services to many Ukrainians, Ukrainians under QET cannot apply for the open work permit extension, as many temporary resident status is linked to passport validity. And as Ukrainians cannot return to Ukraine due to the war without a passport, without a valid work permit, they become undocumented residents without a legal authorization to work or study in Canada. So the petitioners are calling on the Government of Canada to resolve the situation with work permit extensions for Ukrainians in Canada whose passports have expired or are expiring in 2025 or 2026, and allow displaced Ukrainians who came to Canada under QET to continue working in Canada legally for another 3 years, regardless of their Ukrainian passport validity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it is an honor to be able to stand before Christmas and table 3 petitions in the House of Commons today. The first is Canadians that are concerned about the politicization of charitable status that was promised by the Liberal Party in the 2021 election. Canadians are very concerned about that and have signed a petition accordingly. And Mr. Speaker, it's interesting because the next 2 petitions that I table are brought forward by are issues that are important to constituents, but are actually on both sides of a particular issue when it comes to energy development and how to take meaningful action on the environment. But Mr. Speaker, as we know, this is a place where we can have those conversations, and it is an honor to, on behalf of constituents, table both of these petitions, although from different perspectives on issues related to the environment today. And because I'm on my feet and this may be the last chance, Mr. Speaker, I simply wish you and all members of Parliament and all Canadians a very Merry Christmas.
Thank the honourable member, and Merry Christmas to him as well. The honourable member for Charlottetown.
Mr. Speaker, I have 2 petitions to present today. The first is from Prince Edward Islanders that are concerned about Pharmacare. They point out that healthcare is a human right and that age, income, pre-existing conditions, province of territory, and immigration status should not determine their ability to pay. They call on Parliament to immediately pass legislation for a public, single-payer, universal Pharmacare program, as outlined in the Advisory Council on Implementing National Pharmacare in its 2019 report. The second petition, Mr. Speaker, is on the subject of parental alienation and the use of this pseudo theory in divorce and child custody cases. This is something that is commonly invoked when domestic violence is reported on the part of a custodial parent. It's an unfounded and dangerous theory, and sometimes causes courts to lose sight of the best interests of the child and make decisions focused on parental rights and to trivialize domestic violence. The United Nations has actually spoken out on this through a special rapporteur. The Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls has urged governments to prohibit family courts from using parental alienation pseudo theory. And that is exactly what the petitioners are calling on the Government of Canada to do. That is to amend the Divorce Act to prohibit parental alienation accusations in family disputes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canadians are wondering when the NDP will finally stop propping up the Liberal government. But I'll get to my petition. The petition comes from the residents of Skeena-Bulkley Valley that states, the government has attempted to ban and seize the hunting rifles and shotguns of millions of Canadians. The targeting of farmers and hunters does not fight crime, and the government has failed those who participate in the Canadian traditions of sport shooting. Therefore, we call on the Government of Canada to stop any and all current and future bans on hunting and sport shooting firearms. And today, Mr. Speaker, I present this petition because the NDP Member of Parliament for Skeena-Bulkley Valley won't.
The honourable member from Hamilton. I would like to recognize the honourable member from Hamilton Centre who is rising on a point of order. He'll have to take it from his seat. The honourable member from Hamilton Centre is rising on a point
Mr.
of
Speaker,
order.
you know full well that when presenting petitions, they are not to be political. And the language that he's using, I ask him to call and withdraw when it comes to referencing other members of the House for a petition. Because if it's not in his petition, he does not have the ability to reference that.
And indeed, the honourable member from Hamilton Centre is correct. The tradition and in terms of the honourable member, when honourable members present petitions, it should be regarding petition. We're not supposed to offer an opinion for or against the petition, but to just present it on behalf of their constituents or other constituents. And ask the honourable member just to withdraw those, to say that he's going to withdraw those comments and then to continue finishing off presenting his petition. So the honourable member.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Even though it is factual what I said, their MP won't present the petition.
No, I'm gonna just ask the honourable member, please, from just to simply withdraw those comments. No further editorial comment is required.
In respect to the Speaker, I'll withdraw.
The honourable member has finished presenting his petitions. Thank you. The honourable member from Peace River Westlock.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the privilege to present two petitions here today. The first one comes from Canadians from across the country who are concerned about sexually explicit material online. The consumption of sexually explicit material by young people is associated with a wide range of serious harms, including the development of addiction, the reinforcement of gender stereotypes, and the development of attitude favorable to harassment and violence, including sexual harassment and sexual violence, particularly against women. Parliament has recognized these harmful effects and the increasing accessibility of sexually explicit material online for young people, and they see that as an important part of public health and public safety concern. The folks that have signed this petition are calling on the Government of Canada to recognize a 2017 study by the Standing Committee on Health, and they call on the House of Commons and the government to adopt Bill S-210, the Protecting Young Persons from Exposure to Pornography Act. The second petition I have to present, Mr. Speaker, comes from Canadians from across the country who want to raise the awareness about the hashtag Trudeau Must Go. It has been a top trending hashtag on Twitter.
I know, again, members cannot do indirectly what they cannot do directly. And so I'm going to ask the honourable member, even when you're quoting and referring to a member who is sitting in the House, that they would have to make sure that they don't quote that name. The honourable member from Peace River Westlaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The second petition I have to present comes from Canadians from across the country who want to recognize a particular hashtag that has been trending on Twitter about the Prime Minister must go. This has been a top trending hashtag, and more than 500,000 people have retweeted this hashtag. They have described their concerns around the Prime Minister and including his divisive comments and attitudes towards Canadians who have made different health decisions. They also note that the Prime Minister has passed laws, including Bill C-48 and C-69, the No More Pipelines bills, which canceled many energy projects and drove away investment through their excessive regulations. They also note that this Prime Minister has generated more debt than all previous Canadian governments combined. And they also want this government to axe the tax. They note that the carbon tax continues to drive up prices and punish Canadians who have to drive to work or to school or to get groceries. They also note this serious lack of ethics by this Prime Minister. They note the SNC-Lavalin scandal, the Billionaire Island scandal, the We Charity scandal, the $6,000 a night hotel scandal, and the multi-million-dollar Arrive scam app. They are concerned also with his inaction on foreign interference. Therefore, the folks that have signed this petition call on the government or call on the Prime Minister to resign from office and call a carbon tax election. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honourable member. Took it almost right to the second. The honourable member from Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan, has 7 seconds to present his petition.
Please table this petition on behalf of Canadians who are outraged by this government's attack on natural health products, and they call on the House to pass the excellent private member bill from my colleague from Red Deer.
That was a Christmas gift. Je désire informer la Chambre.
I would like to inform the House that the volume of earpieces will now be reset.
Inform the House that the volume of earpieces will now be reset. The honourable, questions on the order paper. The honourable parliamentary secretary.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. The following questions will be answered today. 3145, 3146, 3148, 3149, 3153, and 3159. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, if the government's responses to questions number 3147, 3150 to 3152, 3154 to 3158, and 3160 could be made for orders for return, these returns would be tabled in an electronic format immediately.
Is it the pleasure of the House that the aforementioned questions be made orders for return and that they be tabled immediately? Agreed, and so ordered. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Finally, Mr. Speaker, I would then ask that all remaining questions be allowed to stand at this time, please.
Thank the Honourable Member. I wish to inform the House that I have received notice of a request for an emergency debate. I invite the Honourable Member for Regina Capel to rise and make a brief intervention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I've been in this place now for almost 20 years, over 20 years. I've never seen a situation like this before. Today is the day that the government waited to table the fall economic update, where they would publish the true deficit numbers that Canadians will be on the hook for. As you know, the finance minister resigned this morning. It's unclear. There are some media reports indicating that there may be a replacement now, but at the time of the writing of this letter, it wasn't even clear who the finance minister was. All this at a time when Canadians are facing an emergency situation. They're facing the fastest rate of inflation in over a generation. Food inflation, food prices rising 37% faster here in Canada than in the United States. They're facing a housing crisis that the Prime Minister caused by doubling housing, mortgage, and rent payments. 2 million Canadians are lining up at food banks. There are crime and chaos in our street, and now we have a government in shambles. By waiting until the second last day of the December sitting, the government was hoping to table the fall economic update and then run and hide for 6 weeks in the snow, depriving parliamentarians of holding this government to account for the very thing that Parliament exists for, to oversee government spending. Because of this situation, Mr. Speaker, we find ourselves in an unprecedented case where some new person is going to table the fall economic update. We believe, that's according to media reports, it's still unclear. So it's unclear as to how the economic update will be presented. It's unclear as to whether or not any parliamentarians will be able to participate in any kind of a questioning of whichever minister ends up delivering it or tabling it, if they actually do. And then the House rises at the end of the day tomorrow for 6 weeks. Because of this unprecedented and emergency situation, I believe the best thing you can do to uphold the integrity of Parliament as an institution that exists to oversee, to scrutinize, and approve government taxation and spending is to grant an emergency debate. So that's what my letter to you outlines. When you look at the situation that's facing Canada, threats from abroad, we've got 25% tariffs staring down the barrel of a gun pointed at us by a US president with a strong and fresh new mandate who can smell weakness from a mile away, a cabinet in chaos, 1/5 of the government caucus demanding the Prime Minister resign.
Maybe even more.
We believe that it is now time for you to grant this House at least the opportunity to question the government for a few hours this evening on what should be their fall economic presentation. The finance minister herself said that the former finance minister herself said that going past that $40 billion guardrail would plunge the country into another round of nightmarish inflation and interest rate hikes. Media reports are speculating as to how high that deficit should go, but I believe will go. But I believe it's incumbent upon you now, Mr. Speaker. I know there are precedences and guidelines you might look to whether or not you should approve an emergency debate or not. I think given the fact that there's really no other opportunity for parliamentarians to debate these issues, to scrutinize the economic update that is scheduled to happen this afternoon, I believe you should put the rights of individual MPs and the House as a collective to be the representative of Canadian taxpayers and hold this government to account for their economic update later on today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I thank the Honourable Member for Regina Capel for his intervention, to which I listened very carefully. However, I am not satisfied that this request meets the requirements of the standing orders at this time. Orders of the day.
Orders of the day, ordre du jour, reprise du débat sur une motion de...
Resuming debate on privilege motion with regards to SETC Canada and on the sub-amendment of Mr. Kelly.
The Honourable...
Questions and comments.
Questions and comments. We have 6 minutes and 50 seconds left for the intervention for the member from Calgary Forest Lawn. I see that the honourable member from South Shore St. Margaret's is rising.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I listened intently to the member's speech this morning, and I'd just like him to comment a little bit on the issue of a rare sighting that we've seen today. That sighting is as rare as the mythical dinosaurs or dodo bird. That was a Liberal with principle, apparently. I didn't know that the former Minister of Finance had principle, but apparently she does, and resigned over excessive spending of this government. I'm wondering if the member could comment on the fact that the leader of the NDP seems to have less so in terms of concern of principle. I believe that if the Prime Minister stood up and said there was an election, the leader of the NDP would probably say, now's not the time for an election. So I'd like the member to comment on the apparent principle that the former Minister of Finance has compared to the current NDP leader.
The honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
I want to thank the member for such a great question. Often I would think that it's a trap, but thank you for such a thoughtful question. He's absolutely right. I mean, it's sad to see that the NDP has lost all principles just for the greed of the leader of the NDP's $2.2 million pension. They've sold out Canadians entirely. They've supported the same policies that doubled housing costs, the carbon tax scam that's made the cost of everything go up, the same policies that drove more than 2 million Canadians into a food bank in a single month, where now 1 in 4 people are starting to skip meals. He's sold out Canadians, the leader of the NDP. Also, I don't see many other leaders driving Maseratis, but that's the guy who sold out and propped up this corrupt government.
I have a point of order. The honourable member for Timmins, James Bay.
Yeah, well, we know that the opposite member will say anything and do anything to get attention, but the leader of the New Democratic Party doesn't drive a Maserati. So lying does not help further his argument. I asked for him to withdraw the comment.
First of all, order. So first of all, what the honourable member raised was a point of order, but during his allocation here, the honourable member mentioned the word lying, and he knows that that's not acceptable in the House. So if he could withdraw the comment, please.
I know truth hurts, so I withdraw.
I would just ask members when they withdraw to make sure that they just say withdraw, and I think that will provide prevent a lot of dissension here in the House. The honourable member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
I'd argue that the member from Timmins and James Bay, if he gave attention to his own riding, he wouldn't run away before the next election hiding before his own constituents fire him.
That's right.
Back to the point. Over his $2.2 million pension, he's willing to sell out Canadians, prop up this corrupt, weak, woke, fake feminist prime minister that's driven more Canadians into poverty, that has continued to bring about policies that drive more and more people into a food bank. It's time for a common sense conservative government that bring back the Canada that we once knew.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The honourable for Peterborough, Kawartha.
Madam Speaker, and thank you so much to my colleague for his passionate speech. He dedicates his life to his riding, to his country, and here to ensure that Canadians get the election that they desperately need right now. You know, when we talk about $400 million of a green slush fund that was supposed to help with environmental projects and not one was done, and in fact, Liberal insiders got rich, my question to the member is, what would $400 million do if it was used properly in this economy to help the Canadians who are suffering so much? What difference would $400 million that the Liberals misused and gave to their friends do?
For Calgary Forest Lawn.
I thank my good friend and honourable colleague from Peterborough, Kawartha, for such a thoughtful question. $400 million could get a lot. First of all, let's just address the $400 million that it's going to liberal insiders. It was created, a slush fund was created under the guise of climate change just to reward liberal insiders. But a lot could be done with that. It could have gone to our brave men and women who serve Canada, who are underserved by this Liberal NDP government, who refuse to stand up for them, our brave veterans who are calling out that this Prime Minister has said that they're asking for too much. They deserve all the respect, and they deserve more than what this corrupt Liberal NDP government has given to them.
Point of order, the Honourable Government House Leader.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given what happened earlier today, I would like to inform the House that notwithstanding, there will not be any ministers' the Finance Minister statement at 4 p.m. today.
Honourable point of order, the Honourable Member from Perth Wellington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As you would know, that was an order of the House that the minister is trying to unilaterally withdraw. I seek the guidance from you and the table whether a minister of the Crown can withdraw a unilateral order of this House to prevent the government from making a statement. I'm looking for your advice, obviously, Mr. Speaker, that the government, due to their own disorder and chaos, can now unilaterally withdraw an order of this House of such magnitude, Mr. Speaker.
Good point.
Thank the Honourable Member. I see
the Honourable Member from Berthier-Masquinongé. Point of order. On the same point of order, Mr. Speaker, the Bloc Québécois would also like to have clarification on the matter. We heard an order that there would be a full economic statement at 4 p.m. We are here to listen and react. The content has been published in camera. What we're asking, Mr. Speaker, is the right to ask questions, to ask for clarifications, and for that, the term chaos was used. I think that's the right term. In all of this chaos, what will happen? We need to know what's going on, Mr. Speaker.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Honourable Member from Perth Wellington and l'Honourable Député
and the Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé for having raised important points of order. I would like to paraphrase the motion adopted by the House on the 11th of December. I'll read it in French and then repeat it in English. Unanimous consent orders that, notwithstanding any special or standing order of the House or any usage of the House, at 4 p.m. on Monday, 16th of December 2024, the Speaker will interrupt House deliberations to allow the Deputy Prime Minister to make a statement, after which there would be 10 minutes for questions and observations after that statement. A member of each recognized official opposition party and a member of the Green Party will be able to have a question and answer period equivalent to the time spent by the Minister in his or her statement.
By unanimous consent, it was ordered that notwithstanding any standing order, special order, or usual practice of the House, at 4 p.m. on Monday, December 16, 2024, the Speaker shall interrupt the proceedings to permit the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance to make a statement, followed by a period of up to 10 minutes for question and comments. After the statement, a member from each recognized opposition party and a member of the Green Party may reply for a period of approximately equivalent to the same time taken by the Minister's statement, and each statement shall be followed by a period of 10 minutes for questions and comments. Alors, comme l'ordre a été adopté,
This order being adopted by the House, there is now leave to give the Minister and Deputy Prime Minister to present the fall economic statement. But the order is for the chair to interrupt at 4.
so just so that members all understand, as it was very clear in the order that was adopted by the House, the order was for the Speaker to interrupt proceedings at 4 o'clock to permit the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. So it's a permissive situation here. The order is for me to stand up at 4 o'clock, which I shall do. The Honourable Member from York Simcoe. Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just for the opposition, could you clarify who the Deputy Prime Minister is and who the Minister of Finance is at this time?
I'm afraid I cannot respond to the honourable member of that, and that question would not be a question that would be posed to the Speaker. That would be posed on to the government. L'honorable député de Berthier-Mascon.
The honourable member for Berthier-Masquinongé, rising on a point of order. Mr. Speaker, on the same point of order, Mr. Speaker, I would like to say for the record, for the Hansard, that it shows a real lack of respect and it's unacceptable. It's a lack of respect towards all Quebecers and towards all MPs. I'm not speaking of you, but I'm speaking of what's coming from the government here. It makes no sense. It's total chaos. And it proves, Mr. Speaker, that this government is completely dysfunctional. And that sooner or later, or sooner rather than later, we should have an election. This proves that.
Before I recognize honourable members who are rising on a point of order, comme il est 16 heures,
It being 4 p.m., pursuant to order made Wednesday, December 11th, 2024, I am required to interrupt the proceedings to permit the Minister of Finance to make a statement.
given the information provided by the government House Leader to the House, indicating that the government does not intend to proceed with the statement at this time, the remaining provisions of this motion cannot take effect. That is the period reserved for questions and comments and the replies from the various parties which are dependent on the statement being made. Puisqu'aucune déclaration ne sera...
In the absence of a statement, the House will resume the business that would normally be before it at this time.
Orders of the day, ordre du jour, but I will go to points of order raised by the Honourable Member for New Westminster Burnaby, followed by the Honourable Member for Saanskoff Highlands.
Mr. Speaker, this has been a chaotic day, but the reality is this is an order of the House that can't be countermanded by the government. Our expectation is that the finance minister will be in this House to present the fall economic statement. That is what New Democrats are prepared for. That is what we want to comment and criticize, and that is why we are here. This can't be countermanded by the government itself. Parliament must be respected, and Mr. Speaker, you must uphold the motion that was adopted unanimously by this House.
Hear, hear.
I see that the Honourable Member for Saanskoff Islands is rising on her feet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this is not to make the same point as my honourable colleague for New Westminster Burnaby, but given that it was a moment where the Speaker had to stop at 4 o'clock and seek the presentation, I suggest to Mr. Speaker, we're in a really difficult quandary here as opposition party members. We were given access on a confidential embargoed lockup basis to read the document which we now are not to hear. I'm in a quandary, Mr. Speaker, and I think the honourable table officers have many volumes in front of them. But unless they have a volume of Lewis Carroll, I don't know if they can answer my question. Am I allowed to talk about the document that isn't happening?
Good question.
So I'm going to listen. Order. I'm going to listen to the points of order from various members before I come back to members. So the honourable member for Regina Capella is on his feet on a
Thank
point
you
of
very
order.
much, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to go over the facts of this case. Last week, a few days ago, the government House Leader negotiated in good faith with all the opposition parties a process by which the fall economic update could be tabled in the House. We all agreed on that. That was not something that that was going to happen automatically. It took the participation of all parliamentary parties to allow that to happen. We agreed in good faith. We expected it to happen. Everything that has happened today has been entirely of the government's own making. And parliamentarians should not be deprived of the information as to what is the fiscal situation here in Canada. Canadians are facing an unprecedented crisis on housing, on inflation, on debt and deficits. And this government has a statutory obligation to table these documents by the end of the year. This is the second last sitting day. And you have just denied a request for an emergency debate on this very same issue. There is no other opportunity for parliamentarians to find out just how bad the books are. But I go back to the point as to the fact that the government themselves initiated this agreement. The government committed to opposition parties that it would happen today. And so I ask you, Mr. Speaker, the fact that they are in chaos is not the problem of parliamentarians. It is a problem for Canadians, but it is not a problem caused by Canadians. And they have a right to know exactly what's happening with their tax dollars. And now for the government to come in at literally the last minute and pull the carpet out of an economic update is unbelievable. It is not the actions of a serious G7 NATO partner country. So at the very least, Mr. Speaker, I ask that you find the government in contempt of the House order that was passed by all members of this place.
Thank the honourable from Regina Capella. I see the honourable member from Calgary Nose Hill is also rising on a point of order.
There are people who, there are businesses who are trying to think about making decisions based on what was supposed to be in there today. We have senior economists who have been waiting for this information. Literally the entire nation's business has been waiting for this. All of us who are in this place have the right to see these finances. This is why we're here. It's almost to the point of a violation of our privilege to not be able to see this, frankly. We're being asked to vote on things without a finance minister on the day that a budget was being tabled. This is not what a serious government does. So we need to have this information today. It's borderline privilege. And again, as the Deputy House, or as the House Leader said, this is a contempt of Parliament of the utmost magnitude.
Thank the honourable member from Calgary Nose Hill for her intervention. I'm going to recognize a number of other points of order. The honourable member, l'honorable député de Berthier-Masquinongé.
The honourable member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Well, on this point of order, the motion adopted on December 11th states that the Speaker will interrupt deliberations, not the Speaker may interrupt. So we feel that it is an obligation to interrupt orders of the day. They seem to have nothing to say, but the lockup is over. Currently, outside the House of Commons, journalists are revealing the content of the fall economic statement. And yet, are we seriously to be told that we don't deserve to know what's in it? And that we won't be able to respond and we won't be able to question it for our constituents? Seriously, Mr. Speaker, very unparliamentary language is coming to my mind. I won't use that language, but this doesn't make any darn sense. This is a serious matter of an attack on parliamentary privilege. The members of this House deserve to hear the content. And if the government doesn't have the courage to present this statement, they should at least table it. I have colleagues who are at the lockup who will be able to respond to the content. But we demand an opportunity to respond and to speak on behalf of the rights of our constituents.
are at least three more points of order which I would like to hear. Starting with the honourable member from South Shore St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll try and add to what's already been said. Obviously, not only do certain parliamentarians already have access to it, and most of us don't, journalists have access to it already. That will leak. There is a precedent, Mr. Speaker, which is in the mid to late 1980s when then Finance Minister Michael Wilson's printed budget leaked. And there is a printed budget that's available to be tabled now, or a fall economic statement. They can table those documents now. When it was leaked, the Minister of Finance had to go to the press gallery because the House wasn't sitting in the evening and actually deliver the full budget so that parliamentarians could get access. This is a similar situation in that you now have select people, some whom are not parliamentarians, have access to those documents. And I personally believe it's a breach of my privilege that a journalist has access to those documents and I do not, when the government can simply table the budget, the fall economic statement documents in the House now without giving the speech.
So I thank the honourable member from South Shore St. Margaret's. Indeed, he and I are of the same vintage, and I do remember that. I think it was 1989. I will recognize the honourable member from Calgary Bow River. Oh.
This is my point of privilege that's been infringed on by what has been done. And I feel that this is a very grave injustice for people to have had this information, to come in with minutes before it announced, when those people had the document, were able to go out and use it and have had read it. My privilege has already been broken. Thank you.
Thank the honourable from Calgary Bow River. I see that the honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons is rising on her feet.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Standing Order 32, I have the honor to table in both official languages the Fall Economic Statement 2024.
I see that the honourable member from Perth Wellington is rising on his feet.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Now that the fall economic statement has been tabled, I believe we do now proceed to questions to the minister. So I'd like to ask the government to stand in this place and tell us exactly how big the budget deficit was last year. How much did they blow past the $40 billion? Is it a big deficit or is it a super duper deficit?
Order. Order, please. See that there are a couple of other members who are rising on a point of order. The honourable member from Kitchener Centre was first on his feet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now that the fall economic statement has been tabled, I wonder if there might be unanimous consent for all parties to have a 20-minute round of speeches and 10 minutes of questions and answers, as was already planned to be the case.
Can I have the I'm going to ask the honourable member from Kitchener Centre to please repeat his request for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if there might be unanimous consent of the House to now have all parties offered the opportunity for 20 minutes for a speech and 10 minutes of question and answer afterwards, including the Green Party.
All those opposed to the honourable member moving the motion will please say nay. The Honorable, I regret to say that the order, I understand that there isn't unanimous consent. I'm going to ask the Honorable Member from Regina Capel, who is rising on a point of order. The opposition House Leader is on his feet.
Mr. Speaker, and I just want to remind you that the order that the House adopted was very, very specific. And notwithstanding any standing order, special order, use practice of the House, at 4 p.m. on Monday, December 16th, the Speaker shall interrupt the proceedings to permit the Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Finance, to make a statement followed by a period of up to 10 minutes for questions and comments. After the statement, a member from each recognized opposition party and member of the Green Party may reply for a period approximately equal to the time taken by the minister's statement. So a minister of the Crown just came in and made a statement. Her statement was that she was tabling the fall economic update. That is the statement. At the very least, Mr. Speaker, there should now be a 10-minute period of questions and comments. She chose to have a very short statement. Nothing we can do about that. She came in, tabled, and then ran out before there could be any accountability or scrutiny. I believe the most logical thing for the chair to do is to accept that as the statement that it was, which I would say is a perfect statement on the state of the Liberal government right now. Yeah. And at the very least, allow opposition parties and opposition members to ask questions of the government as to what was in that statement, as to what was in the fall economic update. Yes.
I thank the Honourable Member. I see that the Honourable Government House Leader is rising on a point of order. The Honourable Government, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader is rising on a point of order.
Government House Leader stood actually on a point of order, tabled documents. It's as simple as that.
So I thank the Honourable Government House Leader. Indeed, that was where the chair was going to go, but I do see that there are a number of members who are rising on a point of order. I have not heard the Honourable Leader of the House Leader of the NDP, who is rising on his order, the Honourable Member from New Westminster Burnaby.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, this is a fundamental tenet of parliamentary democracy and transparency and accountability. We've just had the tabling of the document. So if you seek it, anyone respecting democracy should support the following motion: that notwithstanding any standing order, special order, or usual practice of the House, immediately following the adoption of this motion, the Speaker shall interrupt the proceedings to permit one member from each recognized opposition party and a member of the Green Party to make a statement of up to 20 minutes, followed by a period of up to 10 minutes for questions and comments related to the fall economic statement.
Hear, hear.
All those opposed to the Honourable Member moving the motion will please say nay. I see that the Honourable Member from, I was going to say the Honourable Member from Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola, is up on his feet.
Mr. Speaker, there's $61.9 billion of extra spending in here. And the fact is, I came prepared at my seat at the time you went through in great detail exactly the process for the fall economic statement. And the government has reneged. A drop-off drive-by of a tabling where the minister spun around and walked right out. That is contemptuous of the agreed to motion that we would all be here today to undertake a democratic scrutiny of the government. The government cannot pick and choose its role. It is subservient to this House. I would ask you find them in contempt, Mr. Speaker, because obviously the government is not prepared to allow any other process. This was something, Mr. Speaker, that makes not only myself and this whole House look bad, it looks terribly upon you. I would ask that you would defend our rights as parliamentarians and force the government through a mechanism, perhaps a contempt motion, that they have been found in contempt in their duties to this House.
L'honorable from Cumberland Colchester, sorry, not Cumberland Colchester, from Dufferin Caledon, forgive me, is up on his feet on a point of order. The Honourable Member.
Speaker, the regular proceedings today were interrupted for an order. It is a mandatory order. There are different kinds. The language could have said may. May is permissive language. And if the order said may, you would have discretion as to how to proceed.
Right.
But the proceedings were interrupted in the face of a specific order. And the order says the Speaker shall interrupt the proceedings to permit the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance to make a statement, followed by a period up to 10 minutes. If they chose not to use their time to make a statement, that is their problem. You are bound by a mandatory order to now give us the opportunity that is set out in this. It's not permissive. It's not optional. It's mandatory. And we, as opposition members, expect you to follow and enforce your mandatory order.
Hear, hear. So I thank the honourable member, and the Speaker and the Chair is placed in a situation where very much has to follow what is listed here. And I thank the honourable member from Dufferin-Caledon for quoting this statement. I will just say it, that yes, the Speaker shall interrupt, which the Speaker did. But here's what it is: shall interrupt the proceedings to permit the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance to make a statement, followed by a period of up to 10 minutes for questions and comments. After the statement, a member from each recognized opposition party and a member of the Green Party may reply for a period of approximately equivalent of to the time taken by the minister's statement. And each statement will be, or shall be, followed by a period of 10 minutes for questions and comments. The difficulty that the chair finds itself in is that the motion is a permissive motion. The minister chose not to make a statement, by which the rest of the order doesn't follow. But I'm going to be listening to a number of honourable members to hear about this, and there are a number of members who are on the feet for a point of order. On va commencer avec le député.
Let us begin with the member for Berthier-Masquinongé, followed by the member for Louis Saint Laurent. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With all due respect, Mr. Speaker, I feel that the motion compelled you to stop the proceedings, which you did do, but Mr. Speaker, the government chose not to speak to the fall economic statement, but that should not challenge the rights of other parties to speak to the statement and then have questions and answers. And I don't believe you need unanimous consent to proceed to that order of business. Mr. Speaker, with all due respect that I have for you and your office, you have the authority to decide on this. You can choose how long our statements would be and how long questions and answers would be. But there do need to be speeches, Mr. Speaker. Currently, outside this House, journalists are commenting on the content of the fall economic statement. We, parliamentarians, are not being given the privilege of commenting on the statement. So, Mr. Speaker, please, I seriously urge you to consider the fact that you have the authority and the right to permit such a debate. You could even, if you like, Mr. Speaker, suspend the House for a few moments to consult with House employees and clerks to know exactly what procedure to follow. But, Mr. Speaker, you have the duty to preserve some semblance of democracy in a G7 country, need I remind this House. I have many colleagues who have opinions and who are more than willing to comment on the fall economic statement. If the government does not wish to comment on the economic statement, then that's fine. But you, Mr. Speaker, have the right to give us the right to speak. I see that the honourable member for Joliette is rising on the same point of order. Yes, Mr. Speaker, on the same point of order. I've spent the past few hours in a budget lockup to study the budget documents and to prepare to speak in this House because there was an agreement. an agreement where I would be able to speak on behalf of my party. I sat down with colleagues and with a team so that we could sit down, study the documents, prepare our stance and position, and prepare to present said position to the House. I think all parties should be allowed to share their position with regard to the economic statement. Now, too bad, so sad for the government if they don't want to or if they can't speak to the statement, but we are ready and willing to speak to the statement, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Hamilton Centre is rising on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I know it's not often I get a chance to do this, but I did feel it important to rise and actually concur with the opposition MPs who have stood in this House on multiple occasions to call on you to bring this government to order, to present to this country what their vision of the future is so that we can have an adequate debate. I find it rather gormless that they came into this House, dropped the report, and then left without an opportunity for us to debate here today. Mr. Speaker, I am prepared to listen to the member from Vancouver Kingsway present our party's vision for the future of this country. And I know that the other opposition parties will also have their vision. That is what a Westminster system is designed for. So for them to pretend like they can come here, Mr. Speaker, and there has been disorder in this House, but certainly nothing more chaotic than what we've witnessed over the last hour here. So I call on you, in concordance with members of the Bloc, the Conservative Party, and indeed the Green Party, to bring this government to order and allow us to have a full debate on the fall economic statement. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
I thank the honourable member, and I understand the honourable member's frustration in this situation, but the chair is bound by the decision that was passed by the House. And after much debate and consultation, I have to follow the hours as things are set out in the House, in the order that was made by the House. I interrupted the proceedings. The minister chose not to make a statement, and therefore the rest of the motion doesn't apply. But I see, je vois que l'honorable.
I see the honourable member for Berthier-Masquinongé rising on a point of order.
Monsieur le Président, merci.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for giving me the floor once again. Mr. Speaker, with all due respect, we disagree with your current decision and your current interpretation of the situation. Here is what I propose, Mr. Speaker. There is a majority of the House here in agreement. This is unbelievable. I'm not allowed to say who is or is not in the House, but I can say in a roundabout way that there aren't many representatives of the government caucus in this place at this moment. This is shocking. It's unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. We cannot ignore this. Mr. Speaker, this would be a good opportunity for the chair to earn the trust and confidence of a majority of this House by showing us how seriously you take this. We should have a vote on this matter, on how we wish to proceed, and I think the vote would pass. I think it would pass, because currently the media gets to comment on this, but we don't. It makes no sense. It's nonsense. Unfortunately, that is outside the bounds of my role as Speaker to deviate from an order adopted by the House of Commons. I have consulted with many table officers and experts regarding options on the table, but there are no options to proceed that way that was suggested. The honourable member for New Westminster Burnaby rising. Mr. Speaker, I hope that this time will be the right time. I hope that we will be able to speak to this document because its contents are incredibly important and we owe Canadians transparency. That is why we must debate this statement tabled in the House.
Notwithstanding any standing order, special order, or usual practice of the House, immediately following the adoption of this motion, the Speaker shall interrupt the proceedings to permit one member from each recognized opposition party and a member of the Green Party to make a statement of up to 20 minutes, followed by a period of up to 10 minutes for questions and comments related to the fall economic statement.
I thank the honourable member. All those opposed to the honourable member moving the motion will please say nay. The honourable member from Hamilton Centre is rising on a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, surely the honourable member from Winnipeg North would at least give the country the courtesy to rise in his space right now and to tell the rest of the country why he continues to shut down this debate.
The honourable member for Barrie Innisfil is on his feet on a point of order, followed by the honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I would like you to consider this as a matter of contempt of Parliament. The Finance Minister resigned this morning at 8 a.m. The economic statement was to be delivered at 4 p.m. this afternoon. The Prime Minister had ample opportunity to appoint another Finance Minister and a Deputy Minister and have them sworn in to issue the fall economic statement. So that, to me, Mr. Speaker, and I hope you agree, is a point of contempt. They knew that this motion was in place, that it was agreed to by all parties. They failed this Parliament and therefore failed Canadians, and I believe that they were in contempt, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The honourable member, I thank the honourable member. The honourable member from Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the NDP finance critic, I have attended the lockup. I've read the fall economic statement, and I have gone to considerable length, along with my colleagues, to prepare the New Democrats' response to this. What I find patently unfair is that the government has chosen to release that document to the public at 4 o'clock. So that document, a very, very thick book of policies, is now circulating, but there's no opportunity for any other opposition person to have a comment on that, whether Conservative, Bloc, or New Democrat, or Green. And that is patently unfair. In fact, I would say that it's undemocratic. You can't allow the government to present its case and then not allow opposition to present their case in return. That may be how autocracies work. That is not how democracies work, Mr. Speaker. And I would ask that you allow a specified member from each party to have up to 20 minutes so that we can have our comment on this document, as the Liberals have. And I find it, frankly, a little bit infuriating that the government has allowed its voice to be heard in this document, but stands in this House and says no to allowing any other party to have their say. That is not democratic.
Je pense qu'auparavant, le député de...
I believe the member for Louis Saint Laurent was rising and doesn't seem to be rising anymore.
Resuming debate, the honourable... Sorry, I did say orders of the day earlier, but orders of the day again.
Orders of the day, resuming debate on a privileged motion concerning the failure to produce documents pertaining to Sustainable Development Technology Canada and on the sub-amendment to Mr. Kelly.
The honourable leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I must admit that I am totally shocked, flabbergasted that I have to rise in the House of Commons to announce this government's deficit. Normally, they would be the ones announcing their own deficit in their economic statement. But they tabled the fall economic statement without speaking to it. There's no finance minister who will dare to even talk about this fall economic statement. There's a new finance minister who's running off to the Governor General's residence instead of doing his work. We have had 3 different finance ministers today alone. Today, the finance minister and deputy prime minister resigned. Then, through the order of precedent, it went to the Minister of Industry. He became Minister of Finance based on the system that Cabinet uses for precedence. Then he immediately announced that he was resigning because he did not want to take ownership of the financial situation, which he had just found out about. Then the third finance minister today was the public safety minister, who was responsible for keeping our borders safe, who has been threatened by the United States and tariffs. And then the public safety minister switched positions and became the finance minister. And then he disappeared. Where is he? You know what, Mr. Speaker? What's worse about all this is the gargantuan deficit. We were promised a $40 billion deficit. Those were to be the guardrails for the deficit. And what's the deficit? It is $61.9 billion, Mr. Speaker. That's 55% higher than what was promised to us 8 months ago. It's out of control. Mr. Speaker, the finance minister, or should I say former finance minister, noticed, and I give her credit for this, a few months ago, she noticed that this government's deficits were dangerous, that they were leading to higher inflation, slowing down interest rate decreases, harming our social programs, and slowing our economic growth. That's why the finance minister said that there would be a hard line, fiscal guardrails, preventing the deficit from going beyond $40 billion. What are guardrails? They prevent buses from driving off the road and tumbling into ravines. Now, though, the Prime Minister has taken control of the wheel in the bus. He's veered off to the left, past the guardrail, and now he's in the ravine. We've all fallen into the ravine, and this is a threat to the future of Canada and Canadians, Mr. Speaker. That's why we are against this. We will vote against this plan. We insist that New Democrats do their jobs for once and vote non-confidence in this out-of-control government. This government is out of control, corrupt, and costly, and we demand that elections be called. Here's the truth, Mr. Speaker. Let me share with you a truly shocking fact. My grandfather came to Canada from Ireland. Do you know why? Because there was poverty in Ireland. Now, Ireland is 2 times richer than Canada. The GDP per capita in Ireland is $100,000. Ours, what is it? $50,000. The Irish, they don't have natural resources like ours. They don't have any oil. They don't have the massive advantage of living next to the United States, the biggest economy in the world. They, with that situation, are now 2 times wealthier than us because they've made the right decisions. Some say that there are 2 types of people in this world, Mr. Speaker, those who are Irish and those who want to be Irish. They have made good economic decisions, Mr. Speaker. They've cut taxes. They've cut red tape to speed up big projects. They have opened up their economy to free reign for entrepreneurs and for business, fewer state businesses. Half of government costs. So they spend half as much as us on their government, and they have double the wealth for their people. We know what we need to do, Mr. Speaker. We need to cut the red tape, the bureaucracy, consultants, all kinds of corporate nonsense, waste. We need to bring down deficits, taxes. We need to cut the red tape, cut the admin, and allow more open-mindedness, new solutions. Then we will be able to deliver bigger paychecks, powerful paychecks that people will bring home to then be able to reinvest in their communities. So we would have lower inflation and our dollar would keep its value. That's what we would do to fight the threats made by President-elect Trump. We will bring investment home. We will build. We will become the freest economy in the world. We will have the wealthiest citizens of any country in the world. Those are our goals, Mr. Speaker. Enough. It's enough already with the chaos, the poverty, the homelessness. This socialist NDP Liberal government is imposing heavy poverty on people. We need to bring it back to common sense. We need to get back to basics, to give back to Canada what it deserves. The promise that any Canadian who works hard can, in fact, live good lives with good paychecks, with good pensions. Canadians need to be able to afford food and safe, good homes in safe communities. That's common sense, and that's what we will do to put Canada first and foremost.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today flabbergasted by the news that has just been made public. The government has finally revealed its true deficit number. Remember, this finance minister, this outgoing and now former finance minister, told the world that she was putting in place guardrails to limit the damage that her deficits could do. Her deficit plan was $40 billion, a mind-bogglingly large number that was already contributing to rekindling inflation again. This $40 billion was too big. It was out of control as it was. But at least to her credit, she said no more than that. And she decided she would have a guardrail. We know a guardrail is meant to stop vehicles from flying off cliffs. Well, as she was trying throughout the year to avoid going off the cliff, there were two people on the bus who had other ideas. The Prime Minister and carbon tax Carney. And the two of them went to the front of the bus, they grabbed the wheel, they pulled it sharply to the left, smashing into that guardrail, and she tried to resist. So they pulled even further to the left, and they stepped on the gas. The bus flew off the cliff, and now Canadians are at the bottom of the ravine in a big pile of debt. But instead of taking responsibility, the Prime Minister told her that she should take all the blame. That when the ambulances and the police cruisers arrived and the fire department, that she take the blame for running the bus off the cliff, and that carbon tax Carney and the Prime Minister could innocently sit back, and that the Prime Minister could then put carbon tax Carney in charge of driving the next bus. The good old boys in the back room would protect themselves and make the finance minister, the then finance minister, take all the blame. Reminds you of the way they treated the former Attorney General, a brilliant and brave First Nations woman who refused to kowtow to corruption. It reminds us of the way they treated Jane Philpott and so many other brave women who have dared question this self-described feminist prime minister, some feminist indeed, throwing the bus off the cliff and throwing women under the bus. That is his real record. That his real record on finance, Mr. Speaker, is yet another $62 billion deficit. For context, outside of this government, there is no government in the history of Canada that has ever run a $62 billion deficit. Not even in the 90s when the Wall Street Journal said that we were a third world basket case, not even during the massive global economic crisis did the deficit come anywhere close to that. And here we are, with the global economy growing, with the American economy booming in stable times. This deficit is 100% at the feet of this irresponsible Prime Minister and his personal economic advisor, carbon tax Carney. Now, Carney says he doesn't even want the job of finance minister. He doesn't even want to try and drive the crashed out bus after he helped run it off the cliff. and they couldn't find anyone all day. In fact, no one will appear today even to defend this incredible disaster of a budget. Look at the consequences in human terms, Mr. Speaker. We have 1,400 homeless camps in Ontario, 35 homeless encampments in Halifax alone. We have 2 million people lined up at food banks. Scurvy is making a comeback. The government admits that 1 in 4 children are going to school hungry every single day. Unemployment is rising, and according to this budget, expected to exceed 7% by the end of next calendar year. The gap between per capita GDP in Canada and the US is now 30,000 in Canadian dollars, 30,000 it was equal 10 years ago. This is the worst gap since at least the Second World War, and some say the worst gap in a century. Canadian workers are only getting 55 cents of investment for every dollar an American worker gets. $500 billion Canadian investment dollars, which works out to almost a quarter of our economy, has left net to go to the United States, where it builds pipelines, factories, warehouses, pipelines, business centers, Canadian investment dollars paying American wages, while our workers go starving for investment and for salaries to pay their bills. When I travel across this country, I consistently meet 2 types of people. One, those who are a little better off and tell me that, and I'll be very blunt about this, that if I don't win, they will leave the country. And they are very numerous. But you know, I don't worry about them as much. You know who I worry about? The ones who can't leave. The ones who don't know, and if I can just use very blunt language, who tell me, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. I have no idea how I'm going to pay my way. That's right. I met a waitress at a restaurant not long ago, and she came up to me and she grabbed me by the hand and she said, "You have to win." And I said, "Oh, thank you. I appreciate your support." She said, No, it wasn't a compliment. You have to win. And then she told me her story. She told me that she was working 1 full-time job and 2 part-time jobs just to pay her bills. As a single woman in her late 50s. And she was tired of working all the time. So she cut everything out of her budget, every creature comfort, everything she enjoyed about her life, she cut it out so that she could drop one of those part-time jobs. And then one morning, she woke up and she walked outside and her car was gone. And she called her insurance and they said they weren't going to cover the replacement value. So she had to take that job back because she simply cannot live her life without a car. Now you can bet your bottom dollar, the guy who stole the car, he was probably out on bail. This was not his first job.
That's right.
Her taxes have gone up. Her heating bill has gone up. Her wages have not gone up. She's scared to go out in the streets in places where they didn't even lock the door not long ago. These are the people we're fighting for. These silly games over here, they're very entertaining. The soap opera that everyone sees with today, that's all fine. But there are real people whose lives are on the line here, and we have a duty to work for them. And quite frankly, this woman doesn't see me as any, or any of us as any kind of savior. They see us all as a last hope. In fact, she doesn't want to be saved. She just wants her life back. She was taking care of herself just fine before her tax, her heat, her grocery bill went through the roof and her car went missing. She was doing just fine. She was doing everything right. Met another guy at the Le Brat Brewery a few days ago, and you can watch the video of me talking with him. He walked up to me and he said, "I have 3 jobs and I can't make it. We're renting. We have no hope. We've given up on ever owning a home. We're renting. We can barely make it." And he said to me, "I feel ashamed when I talk to my kids because they ask me why I'm never around and why we can never have a house. And I feel like a failure." But he didn't fail. He has been failed.
That's right.
He has been robbed of the promise of Canada. It was a very simple promise. that if you worked hard, you got a good life. Now, it wasn't fancy or extravagant, but you got a house with a yard where you could have kids playing safely. And you could have a nice dog that you could afford to feed along with the kids. And your kids could play safely in the streets. That was the promise. Now, politicians break promises all the time. But you know what was bad about this promise? This promise didn't belong to this prime minister. It wasn't his promise to break. It belonged to all of us. And our purpose is to bring home that promise for that young man, that young father, and that older female worker so that they can once again take back control of their lives, live in a safe country where their hard work earns them a good wage, where their rent and their food is affordable, and where when they go to bed at night, they know that they will be safe throughout their sleep and that they will have their car in their driveway in the morning. A country where people are proud again to fly the flag, where they know the government is a servant and not a master, where they understand that every day the Commons, this place, works for the common people, not for the ego of one man desperate to cling on to his job. We must remember that we are servants in this place. We have a job to do on behalf of the people who sent us here. Our personal dramas are not important. The dramas that should seize all of our concern and imagination are the daily dramas of the working women and men that build this country. We are in it for them. We're going to give them back control of their lives in the freest country on earth, Canada. Let's bring it home.
Come on, get up, lad.
Before we move to question and comments, pursuant to Standing Order 38, it is my duty to inform the House that the questions we raise tonight at the time of adjournment are as follows. 1, carbon pricing, the Honourable Member for Bow River. And 2, the Honourable Member St. Albert Edmonton on democratic institutions.
Pursuant to Standing Order 38, to inform the House that questions to be raised tonight at the time of adjournment are as follows. The Honourable Member for Bow River on carbon pricing, and the Honourable Member for St. Albert Edmonton on democratic institutions. I thank all members for their attention. The
Questions and comments.
Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Speaker, you know, there is no one more so than the Leader of the Conservative Party that both inside the House and outside the House tries to portray a false impression that Canada is broken, Mr. Speaker. The reality is Canada is the best country in the world to call home. We can do a worldwide tour where you will see that whether it's interest rates, whether it's inflation rates, that Canada is virtually second to no other G7 country. And when you think of things like foreign investment, we are third in the entire world in 2023, Mr. Speaker. To the Leader of the Conservative Party, Canada is not, in fact, broken. And I would remind him that he sat around a cabinet table with Stephen Harper, where Canadians sent a very resounding message back in 2015, where a third party took over as the government of the day because his government back then was such a disaster.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, everything is broken today. Absolutely everything. And 70% plus Canadians agree with me on that. The borders are broken. We have 500,000 people here illegally, according to the government's own documents. The immigration system is broken. We now have refugee camps, something we only used to see in third world countries that are being set up across our country in formerly tranquil and peaceful suburbs. Our drugs and disorder have broken our communities. We've lost more people to drug overdoses in the last 9 years than died fighting for Canada in the Second World War. Absolutely everything is broken after 9 years of this pathetic prime minister who's right now hiding under his desk.
Here, here.
The honourable member from Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I agree with a lot of what my honourable colleague said in terms of his description of how difficult it is for many Canadians. I don't know that I would say everything's broken, but I'll tell you a lot of people are broke. A lot of families are struggling. 50% of Canadians living paycheck to paycheck. 1 out of 4 parents are skipping meals to feed their children. So my question is to my honourable colleague, the NDP proposed giving those people an immediate cut by permanently removing the GST off life's essentials like home heating, on all grocery items, on cellular and internet bills, on diapers. But he voted against that. So if he thinks everything's broken and he truly believes that people are struggling right now, why did he vote against the NDP motion that would have given people an immediate 5% break?
Will save anybody that many vendors are not even implementing, and that will be gone before it starts. And you have the NDP talking, but this is the NDP. That member has
Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Vancouver Kingsway, who had the opportunity to ask a question, to please hold the microphone, hold his place until he's recognized by the speaker again to speak. The honourable leader of the opposition.
The member wants me to tell the truth about the permanent tax change. Well, there is a permanent tax change he has supported, which is to jack up the carbon tax on absolutely everything. He's voted to quadruple that tax to a eye-watering 61 cents a liter that would literally grind our economy to a halt. It would take food off grocery shelves. It would take parts out of factories. It would shut down the farm vehicles that bring us our food. It would be a nuclear winter if that tax increase that he has voted to legislate into place ever happens. And that's why we need a carbon tax election so that I can axe the tax.
Questions and comments?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's so rare that speakers rounds get around to Green Party to put a question to lead official opposition. So I want to have this opportunity. I want to start by saying there was nothing in his statement with which I could disagree, because it vaulted us into a frenzy of patriotism. I love this country. There's no place in the world I would rather live than being Canadian. But the honourable leader of the official opposition also maybe gave us a chance to get to know him a bit better. What would he do instead? He mentioned he'd met a waitress. He's known me a long time. I was a waitress. I waitressed for more than a decade, couldn't afford to go to university, but only in Canada was it possible for me to go to law school as a mature student. I want to ask the honourable member, since I didn't join a political party until I was over 50, what jobs has he held in real life outside of politics that make him think he could be Prime Minister?
Order. The honourable leader of the opposition.
I'd be happy to talk about the jobs, Mr. Speaker. My first job in here was to help pass the Federal Accountability Act to crack down on the corruption that we've seen. Then I helped cut the GST so that Canadians could save when they made every single consumer purchase 7 to 6 to 5%. Then I worked with Prime Minister Harper to help balance the budget and to rebuild the military so that we would have necessary equipment to help destroy Al-Qaeda after the attacks of 9/11. Help deliver the lowest inflation of any government in 40 years, leaving behind a balanced budget and the best balance sheet of any government in the G7. In fact, it turns out the job experience I have is best aligned with the job that I promised to do. Now let's bring it home.
Questions and comments. Question commentaire. The honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
Thank you. Well, thank you. And of course, the words of the leader of the official opposition do bring great hope to Canadians at a time when they need it most. This government had committed, this Liberal prime minister committed to a a massive $40 billion deficit as the guardrail. Now, of course, that's an irresponsible number at $40 billion, but that's what their promise was. And they smashed through it. And who are the they? It's that NDP Liberal Prime Minister and Carbon Tax Carney, his real economic advisor. And they tried to pin this massive failure on their finance minister. Now, she declared that she didn't have confidence in the Prime Minister and that she wouldn't support him. So my question to the leader of the official opposition, and I know that he'll have some very insightful wisdom for Canadians, is what can Canadians look forward to that a common sense Conservative government would do to restore fiscal sanity and clean up this $62 billion mess that Prime Minister has created?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
$62 billion mess. That is such a tough question. I almost didn't want to stand up and answer it for a second there. But it is a big mess. It is an incredible mess that this Prime Minister will leave behind when he takes run. And I understand that might happen any minute. As Carbon Tax Carney is lining up, you almost wonder if Carbon Tax Carney planned it all this way. You know, he's the top economic advisor. He pushed all of these extra spending measures on the finance minister. And then she objected to the crazy $62 billion deficit. She's out now. The Prime Minister might soon be out. And who will walk up? Well, Carbon Tax Carney, taking the wheel of the bus after he helped crash it, Mr. Speaker. But he's not the only one. There's also the getaway car. Who's been driving the getaway car? The NDP. The NDP leader. Today he said that the Prime Minister should resign. And yet, just days ago, he voted to keep the Prime Minister exactly where he is. So it is time for the NDP leader to state clearly that he has not only lost confidence in the Prime Minister, but he is prepared to vote non-confidence or take any other legal steps necessary to express non-confidence in this Prime Minister in order to trigger a carbon tax election as soon as possible.
Resuming debate. The Honourable Member from New Westminster Burnaby is rising on a point of order.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. There have been consultations amongst the parties, and if you seek it, I believe you'll find unanimous consent for the following motion, that notwithstanding any standing order, special order, or usual practice of the House, the member for Vancouver Kingsway be permitted to speak a second time to this sub-amendment.
All those opposed to the Honourable Member moving the motion will please say nay. Agreed. The House has heard the terms of the motion. All those opposed to the motion will please say nay. Carried. Resuming, reprise du débat, l'honorable député.
Resuming debate.
Je vais commencer par vous dire que je vais partager.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will be sharing my time with the member for Joliette. Well, this is a very unusual situation. I have 10 years of experience in this House. I've never seen anything like this in Parliament. It's total chaos. Coming back to the fall economic statement, it's basically a horror story. We've been asking for an economic statement for some time. It's traditional that the government update Canadians as to its economic record. We've been talking about this since November. And then they kept dithering about it. But then finally, they made a decision. They decided to do it right before the end of the parliamentary session. And to bring the absurdity to the highest possible point, they waited until the last minute to present the fall economic statement. And yet, the craziest thing of all is that the Minister of Finance, the Deputy Prime Minister, stepped down And she said, no, I refuse to table this. And she decided, no, I'm leaving. And she left, and I think that showed a great deal of nobility, in fact. So now we don't even know if there's going to be an economic update. We don't have a Minister of Finance. Then we learn that there will be a new Minister of Finance. It sounds like the person in question is kind of a jack of all trades. In fact, he's kind of like a fireman. He just pops up to fix things. Wait, I'm so sorry to interrupt the member, but there are members in this house who seem to be chatting away. And yet, when their leader was speaking, none of them said anything. So I would ask them to leave and to show respect to the honorable member for La Prairie. Well, thank you. So they seem to have turned to this jack of all trades who always steps in to help them, and he will be the new Minister of Finance. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand that if you're tabling the document, which they did, then you should debate it. But no, they've decided to muzzle Parliament. They are acting like a chameleon who's on a piece of Scottish tartan, constantly changing their approach, so to speak. Well, darn, we're pretty excited about this economic update. We say to ourselves, well, it must be something remarkable. Nope. We didn't get any of the essential information. And yet the Minister of Finance stood up and put her hand on her heart in April and said there would not be a deficit above 40 billion. And I'm sure that she meant it. And yet there's been a series of disasters ever since. In October, it had reached 46.8. Then it's just been a festival of electioneering and just baubles for Canadians. So that was a huge amount of spending. Meanwhile, this prime minister, who basically seems to be hyperactive when it comes to spending, that brought the deficit to 48.3 billion, but that's not it. That's not it at all. Because there are still 3.5 months until the end of the fiscal. You'll hear more about that later from my colleague, but if you look at what's going on here and you ask yourself, what on earth is going on here? And yet it's not actually that surprising, except for one thing. The Minister of Finance has stepped down. She's the one who was supposed to table the update. And she left. She said, oh, I'm not touching this because she has principle. Madam Speaker, perhaps the Prime Minister should treat her as a role model. She promised that it wouldn't go above 40 billion. But the Prime Minister didn't agree. In fact, the previous Finance Minister, Mr. Morneau, stepped down because he thought that not enough was being spent. And once again here, the Prime Minister doesn't think that the Prime Minister, this Finance Minister didn't spend enough. It's very easy to spend other people's money. And that's what this Prime Minister loves to do. So imagine having your Deputy Prime Minister step down. It's as if in Star Trek, Spock jumped out the window of the Enterprise because he no longer believes in Captain Kirk. It's wild, Mr. Speaker. Listen, the Deputy Prime Minister, she's the number 2 in the government. It's not just anyone. And she just left while throwing a couple punches at the Prime Minister. Well, Madam Speaker, the government was already dysfunctional. We know that everything they touched turned to mud. It's the opposite of Midas. If you want something to become dysfunctional, just give it to the Prime Minister and it will splatter everywhere. And in fact, there were 20 Liberal members who staged a mutiny this summer, then 40 Liberal members. They did calm down eventually, but then 8 ministers have said they won't run again. Only 8 that we know of course. They said They didn't say why, of course. They all gave excuses, but they all said they wouldn't run again. But they've looked at the polls. And in fact, if they turn the paper upside down, it might look like they're first in the polls. No, they know that it's not going to work. It's apparently only the Prime Minister thinks he still has a chance. But of course, he's never been great at math. Maybe that's why. Meanwhile, the Deputy Prime Minister has decided to jump ship. I feel a lot of compassion for them. I've been watching their faces during question period. It's not easy for them. And I look at the PM and I say to myself, does this dude really have the confidence of his own caucus? I think no. As for his ministers, apart from a couple loyals, I don't think he does have the confidence of his cabinet. And as for Canadians, I think we can say that they also don't trust him. Except for a couple loyalists. The Prime Minister still thinks that he's the man of the moment. For example, he went to Mar-a-Lago to see Donald Trump. He was the first head of state to visit Donald Trump. And yet, Donald Trump has been insulting him ever since and keeps calling him the governor of the 51st state. So if you want to show some international leadership, well, that's not a great example of it at all. So every time this Prime Minister does something, it messes it up. Now, if it were just him, a little bit like Eeyore and Winnie the Pooh, who is always having trouble, that would be one thing. But the problem is that he's dragging Canadians into his mess. It's not funny. In the Bloc Québécois, we keep saying, we have a responsibility here. This House has been stuck for 3 months because this government won't produce documents. And we keep saying to them, why don't you let us move forward? Well, they say, well, we don't want to give you the documents, but it's an order of the House. The government doesn't seem to care at all. They have no vision. They have no ideas. The only idea they've had is the GST break. Well, I mean, calm down. If that's the best idea you have, calm down. That's the only decision they've been able to make. And it's a decision that all economists, Quebecers, entrepreneurs, everyone thinks it's a terrible idea. They spent $1.6 billion on that. On this ridiculous GST break. I mean, I could tell you all sorts of horrible stories about this. People don't know what to do with this GST break. Look, for example, certain kinds of dolls that are not rigid are being exempted. But what do you do with a doll where the body isn't rigid and the head is? That's the kind of ridiculous story we have here. It makes no sense. These are just anecdotes, but it's wild, and it shows why people don't believe in this government. The Prime Minister doesn't seem to understand that, but we, the Bloc Québécois, are speaking to our constituents. We're listening to them. And what we're hearing from them is that Quebecers want this government out. This government doesn't represent them anymore. Once upon a time, it did represent Quebecers. Yes, they elected this government, but this government is way past its due date. Way past it. And we want this Prime Minister to act like a statesman. We want him to stand up in this House, roll up his sleeves. If he's so convinced that he did the right thing, fine. Let's have an election. That's the only thing left for him to do. Madam Speaker, the Bloc Québécois will be there. We will make tracks all over Quebec. We will speak to people. We will debate Liberal candidates, and we will convince Quebecers that the only credible option to defend the interests of Quebecers in this House, the only party that will actually look into their eyes and tell them the truth without compromises, the only party that knows their values and their needs is the Bloc Québécois. And Madam Speaker, you'll see. We will return to this House after the election with a much bigger caucus. Question and comments, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I want to pick up on the issue of something in which I understood the Bloc were actually fairly supportive of, and that was the idea of the tax holiday break for people in all regions of the country. It was an election platform issue from the Conservative Party, where they had made the commitment, instead of 2 months, it was only going to be for 1 month. Even the leader of the Conservative Party talked very positively about that in his tweet. Then the Conservatives changed their mind, and I'm wondering if the member from the deputy leader from the Bloc provide his thoughts in regards to that specific issue? Does he believe that this is something that does benefit the people of Quebec, in fact, the people of Canada, giving them this tax break during the holiday season?
L'honorable député de la...
The honorable member for La Prairie. I'd like to thank my Liberal colleague. And I have to congratulate him. He's brave enough to still rise in this House. He often rises. So I congratulate him. But when it comes to the GST break on certain products, you can't just do these things in this sloppy way. People are against this. Quebec, almost unanimously, people are against this. Business owners are tearing their hair out. For 2 months, they're going to have to take taxes off certain products. It's not always clear which. And then later, 2 months later, they have to bring it back. And that's going to cost $1.6 to $1.8 billion of taxpayer money. And the government says it's going to help people. But who is it going to help? Who's going to help? Who's going to benefit from these exemptions? Not the most vulnerable, the people who actually need help from the government. They're not the ones who are going to benefit most, because this is actually what economists call a regressive measure. It actually hurts vulnerable people, doesn't benefit as much, benefit them as much. So this is a matter of taxpayer money. And this government, before people can even get the money in their pockets, the government is already there to take it away. This shows a complete lack of seriousness. There are so many better ideas. We have proposals. They just need to listen to us. The honorable member for Louis Saint-Laurent. Well, Madam Speaker, I love hearing my Bloc Québécois colleagues speak. In fact, I had the honor of sitting on the National Assembly of Quebec with him in the old days. Now, my colleague has brought up this ridiculous and humiliating situation. All Quebecers and Canadians are embarrassed about what's happening here. The number 2 in this government stepped down, and she slammed the door behind her. And today, a few of them just showed up in a hurry, quickly threw the paper on the table, and refused to have the debate. My colleague has raised the issues, the real issues with the GST break. This is the first time that this government is doing a so-called tax decrease, and this But listen, I'm going to challenge my colleague. It's a very simple challenge. Every time the Bloc Québécois voted, it always voted in the interest of Quebec and only in the interest of Quebec. No. My colleague is mad because he knows I'm right. Look at any Bloc Québécois vote at any given time. If you go look at the bill, and if you think about the interests of Quebec, then you'll see that the Bloc Québécois has always voted in the interests of Quebec and only in the interests of Quebec. We are always standing up for Quebec. Let my colleague find a single piece of legislation that I voted on, and I would never be ashamed of any of those things. Any of my colleagues. I would look people straight in the eye and tell them, the Bloc Québécois is here for you. We won't compromise. We are upright, and we're proud of how we voted. I'll take a brief question. No? The honorable member for Berthier-Masquinonge, a brief question, please. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to ask my colleague to put himself in the shoes of someone in another country, looking at the situation of the Canadian government right now. What would someone in another country think of what's going on right now? The honorable member for La Prairie. Well, Madam Speaker, it's a bit depressing to think about. Just think about our Prime Minister's visit. His visit to meet Donald Trump. What did other world leaders think of what happened when Donald Trump then called him the 51st US governor, and our Prime Minister had nothing to say to that? Do Quebecers and Canadians really deserve this international representative? No, of course not. We deserve much better.
Reprise de débat, l'honorable député de Joliette.
Resuming debate, the honorable member for Joliette.
Aujourd'hui, en Chambre, le gouvernement.
Today in the House, this government tabled the 2024 Fall Economic Statement. So my question, Madam Speaker, fall economic statement is this exactly? Is it the Minister of Finance's economic statement? But she stepped down this morning. Is she the one who wrote this? Because she chose to step down rather than endorse this. Whose economic statement is this? Because it doesn't seem to be supported by the person who until today was the Minister of Finance, because she's preferred to step down rather than present it. So is it rather the new Minister of Finance's economic statement? Even though I think he just got sworn in, he used to be the Minister of Public Safety. Has he even read it? Has he read it? The government House leader is the one who came to bring it to the House, but she didn't make a speech. She didn't read a speech that might have been written before. Does she support this economic update, even though she's the one? Does she support it, even though she's the one who tabled it without actually taking the floor to defend it? Are we ever going to see the man who used to be the Minister of Public Safety and who is now suddenly the Minister of Finance? Will he defend this? Does he even know how long it is? Does he know anything about it? Has he even had a glance at it? We have no idea. Besides, this economic statement is very disappointing. We don't know whose it is, first of all, perhaps the Prime Minister's, but we don't know. But what's very clear is that we have learned very little from this economic statement, because this is a government that is out of energy, without direction or vision. It's basically like a ship with a torn sail that is floating rudderless in the doldrums. And this government seems to think that just by wishing on a star, that it's going to finally get somewhere in this broken down old boat. But we have no idea who's here to defend this statement, because currently no one is standing up to defend it. There are two interesting numbers in this statement. The deficit's the one for this year, but even more so in this fall statement, which is rather kind of a Christmas update. A sad Christmas, this Grinch-like government's Christmas. We also learn the number for last fiscal, the deficit from last fiscal, and that's very interesting. The Minister of Finance, trying to reassure English-speaking Canada's financial class, has said, I'm going to make a fiscal anchor. I'm going to set a fiscal anchor. And since 2015, of course, none of these deficits have actually ever respected the anchors. But she said, you have my word, it'll be 40 billion. But instead, it's actually $61.9 billion. And we're learning this right before the holidays in a document that was tabled at the very last minute, where we don't even know who would stand up on the government side to defend it. And this government still hasn't tabled the public accounts. Normally, it would do so in September, but I think now we won't even get them by the end of the year. It will end up happening next year.
They could, however, table them tomorrow. Now, 61.9 billion. The former finance minister said, hand on heart, it will not be more than 40 billion. I promise we will stop spending all over the place. And then this statement is tabled with a deficit of 61.9 billion for last year. And as for this year, there are 3 months left of the fiscal, and we've already gone beyond 40 billion. So this commitment has been broken. We are approaching and about to go beyond the 40 billion. So when will we find out the true deficit for this fiscal year? We don't know. This government is not working seriously. It's whatever. It's nonsense. It's illogical. This economic statement will go down in history, but not for the right reasons. First of all, the finance minister chose to resign rather than back this fall economic statement, which goes to show how good it is. Now, the government made a commitment. Before the horrific numbers we can find in this document, the government did promise to present a plan for our border. Well, there is no border plan in this document. It's just one number, 1.3 billion for the borders over the next 6 years. Why 1.3 billion? It's because when you convert this into American dollars, it's 1 billion American. So what will this money be used for? For drones, for more border guards, for helicopters? Well, there's no plan here. There's a number in the budget, A plan will eventually follow. The finance minister wrote this number, no plan, doesn't want to back it. It's been tabled. The new finance minister is not even aware of the plan. Why did the finance minister resign? Well, she promised not to go beyond 40 billion, but her government won't stop handing out election goodies. For instance, the 1.6 billion for the GST break, that's in this document. The government is taking on more debt to try to give people little election goodie bags to try to do better in the polls, which won't even happen. So all of these businesses have to adjust how they do things for 2 months. Business owners said it was a headache. And when you look at which measures, which products, it's restaurants, alcohol, and junk food mostly. It's like a gift to the wealthiest, in fact. The Prime Minister also announced that he wanted to send Canadians $250 checks to those who work up to $150,000 gross. But now he's the only one who wants to send those checks. There's no mention of the $250 checks in the fall economic statement. I don't think we'll ever hear about that check again. Now, there's another thing missing from this document, Madam Speaker, capital gains. The government in the last budget said that they would do so to try to balance the books. They started in June, then there was a Ways and Means motion. Then there was another Ways and Means motion. It didn't work out. It was never actually presented to the House. So, Madam Speaker, I was excited to go into budget lockup to really go through this document to find the details about that, but there were no details. And that's $7 billion for this year. So if it's not implemented, then all businesses and individuals made choices, and then the budget would be ballooned by another $7 billion. So, Madam Speaker, none of this makes any sense anymore. The government is a ship that is rudderless, that is adrift. There's no captain. As the finance minister said in her letter to the Prime Minister, it is important to serve the people before serving one's party and one's personal best interests. I think that for the good of Canadians, for the common good, they should call an election because it's just folly and nonsense. Non-stop, Madam Speaker. As I was saying, there were the capital gains. There are a few elements in this budget, in this statement, but there are no major milestone measures. It mostly just extends existing programs. The spending that's been announced, some of it will be spent in 2028, 2029, 2030, after the next term. The finance minister must have said to herself, well, we'll be reelected as a majority. And they're already planning for what they would do with their imagined next majority. As my St. Jude is the patron saint of lost causes, Madam Speaker. I think currently the government should go and pray to that saint, to the saint of lost causes and hopeless causes. But even that saint has lost confidence in this government, Madam Speaker. Meanwhile, the needs on the ground are significant, and some things are needed that wouldn't cost the government anything. For instance, supply management. My new whip has worked a day as whip today. Well, the supply management bill is blocked at the Senate. Is it going to get through at some point? Is the government doing its job? No, it isn't. And what about the religious exemption for hate speech? We need to get rid of it. That wouldn't cost a penny. And it's awful. It's abhorrent that that exists and the government's not doing anything. And what about 65 to 74-year-olds? Half of the election goodies for seniors might have actually helped seniors, but we need to help seniors. There's nothing done for housing. We thought that there'd be a plan in this document to protect our borders. There's nothing. As for all the current challenges with Canada-US relations and EI reform, there's nothing about that. There are so many ongoing problems, and the government has just completely failed to mention or address them.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, interesting. We've known for years now in terms of the Conservative Party's approach to the minority government, and that is that they've been wanting and calling for an election for well over 2 years now. What we have seen is the Bloc has kind of coalesced and working with the Conservatives more and more, in which they too would like to see an election. And that's fine if they want to adopt that attitude, but to try to say that there's nothing in the fall economic statement in terms of important issues, I would have the member reflect in terms of the exempting the Canada disability benefit from tax is a very positive measure that's inside here. If the member and in particular Conservatives want to focus on the debt, take a look in terms of the public debt charges since 1981 and compare it to the GDP, which is so critically important. And I'm wondering if he could provide his thoughts on comparing the debt to Canada's GDP.
The honourable member for Joliette.
Oui.
It was just a gift to people. What we found out this morning is that the finance minister called that a pre-election move. So even the previous finance minister agrees with us. The finance minister herself condemned these pre-election gimmicks of trying to buy votes with little presents. Now, as for the deficit, the finance minister, she said that we have indeed been spending more and more each year since 2015, but she said we want to reassure the markets. We're going to stabilize our spending. But we don't know about everything about the spending because the government has not tabled the public accounts for this current year. So it's inexcusable, it's unacceptable, and let's fix this with an election. The honourable member for Lévis-Lapinière. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I listened carefully to my colleague's speech, and I'm very happy to hear that he has drawn the same conclusion as the Conservative Party, which is that we need an election as soon as possible. We've been calling for this for basically a year now. As of today, can my colleague guarantee that he will support the Conservative Party on all confidence votes in this place so that we can finally free Canada from the political chaos that we're currently witnessing? The honourable member for Joliette. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank my honourable colleague for his kind words about my speech and all, but I do need to set the record straight about something. My job and my colleague's job, well, we don't take orders from Conservative voters or Conservative MPs. We were all elected in our ridings to sit in this place and represent Quebec. Every time we rise, we do so with Quebecers in mind and in heart. Every time we vote, every time we make a decision, everything we do here is always in the best interests of our constituents, Quebecers. With every decision, with every bill, with every vote, we will act Quebec. We often do so. It's hard work, and it's work that isn't always very visible, but we are doing that work. The Liberal ship is captainless, rudderless, adrift, and the best way to fix this for Quebecers and for everyone is to have an election.
Time for a brief question. The honourable member, l'honorable député de Saint-Jean, Lac Saint-Jean. Saint-Jean, c'est ça? Lac Saint-Jean? Je l'ai bien la première fois?
J'aurais compris, vous oubliez.
The honourable member for Lac Saint-Jean. Lac Saint-Jean, okay, that's my writing indeed. Now, here's my question. First, I'd like to thank my colleague for his excellent speech and his excellent reply to the Conservative colleague's question just now. In the 2024 Fall Economic Statement, there is a change made by this government as relates to the oil and gas industry. In this statement, will less money be sent to the oil and gas industry? A quick reply, the honourable member for Joliette. No, there's been no change. In fact, The minister, who is no longer minister, she had a $23 billion plan for the oil and gas industry. Now there are new details about that. For instance, there is an explanation about how hydrogen production using methane will be supported. And they say that that's green, that that's good for the environment. So there have been no changes. All of this will support oil and gas, and bitumen. And they greenwash it and say it's positive, but we've already gone beyond our climate targets by 1.5 degrees. The government needs to do a lot more, but the government doesn't appear to be doing anything at all. In fact, thank you, Madam Speaker.
Resuming debate, the gentleman for Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, on the occasion of the 2024 Fall Economic Statement, it is clear that Canada is at a crossroads. Many Canadians are struggling and uncertain about their and their families' futures. We are facing multiple overlapping crises that require immediate and decisive action from the federal government. Yet, we are watching a Liberal government in complete disarray, out of ideas, flailing with gimmickry, and unable to implement a coherent, effective plan to address these challenges. And we are seeing a Conservative opposition who has reduced these complex issues to nursery rhymes, able only to muster bumper sticker slogans to the most challenging problems facing Canadians.
That's right.
They are proposing outdated policies, not only that won't work, but that caused many of the structural problems we are seeing today in the first place.
Right.
They will cut the services Canadians need, reward their corporate backers, and create untold damage to working and middle-class Canadians. Let's review the major crises facing Canadians as a result of successive Conservative and Liberal governments. The cost of living crisis continues to escalate, with millions of people struggling to make ends meet. The cost of essentials such as rent and food have increased by over 20 and 21% over the last 3 years. Fully half of all Canadians are living paycheck to paycheck, and 1 in 4 parents have cut back on their own food consumption to ensure their children have enough to eat. The rising costs of staples such as home heating, telecommunications, and transportation are straining household budgets, making it virtually impossible for families to save for the future or handle unexpected expenses. 80% of Canadians now believe that owning a home in Canada is only for the rich. Among those who do not own a home, over 70% have given up on ever owning one. In major cities across Canada, tenants are regularly paying over 50% of their income on shelter, a crippling and unsustainable burden.
Yep.
Income inequality in Canada has hit the highest level ever recorded. The top 20% of Canadians hold more than 2/3 of the country's wealth, averaging $3.4 million per household. By comparison, the bottom 40% of Canadians own only 2.8% of our country's wealth. At the same time, the top 5% of income earners paid a lower overall tax rate in 2022 than the bottom 95%, with the top 1% paying an even lower rate. Welcome to Conservative and Liberal tax policy, Madam Speaker. After decades of federal underfunding, Canada's healthcare system is under serious strain, with long wait times, inadequate access to essential services, and high levels of burnout among healthcare workers. Millions of Canadians do not have a family doctor, critical to accessing our healthcare system. Madam Speaker, I remember in 2008 campaigning with Jack Layton when he pointed out then that 5 million Canadians had no family doctor. We then saw for the next 7 years Conservative government under Stephen Harper. And here we are 9 years after that under the current Prime Minister, and there's more Canadians today that do not have a family doctor after those decades of conservative and liberal government in this country.
Shame.
Thousands of Canadians continue to be harmed by the toxic drug crisis without timely access to publicly funded treatment facilities and other life-saving services. Canada is facing a serious mental health care shortage with wait times for mental health services especially long for children and youth. The urgency of climate action cannot be overstated. By 2025, the previous 10 years of climate change will have reduced Canada's GDP by an estimated $25 billion. Without concerted action, by 2030, GDP will be an estimated $35 billion lower than it would have been otherwise, and by 2055, it will be an estimated $100 billion lower. So when the Conservatives come talking about the price of the carbon tax, you should ask them, Madam Speaker, what is the cost of inaction in dealing with the climate crisis? Because it's multiple billions more than action to deal with it. Moreover, when governments are forced to cover the costs of climate change by rebuilding damaged infrastructure, paying for increased healthcare costs, and fixing damages from weather-related disasters, including compensating farmers for lost agricultural products, capital is diverted from activities that would drive additional growth. Youth unemployment in Canada hit 14.5% in August, the highest level since 2012 outside the COVID-19 pandemic. Madam Speaker, some 1 million Canadians under 29 are without jobs or training today as we speak, an issue of intergenerational inequity that Deloitte estimates will cost our economy $18.5 billion over the next decade. Never mind the cost in broken dreams and shattered lives. Enhancing productivity is vital for economic growth and competitiveness. However, spending on machinery and equipment by businesses and on research, development, and innovation and training has been falling as a share of Canada's GDP for decades. Actually, Madam Speaker, since 2000, despite the large corporate tax cuts introduced at the turn of the century and promoted by both Conservative and Liberal governments. With rapid job creation and population growth, business capital investment has not kept up. Despite its commitments, the federal government is failing to achieve reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. Indigenous housing, water, and infrastructure are in perilous conditions. The lack of progress on nation-to-nation governance and the stripping of wealth from Indigenous territories have resulted in poverty rates and incarceration levels among Indigenous people that are nothing short of shameful. This government has failed to fully implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls for action, nor the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls calls for justice. New Democrats believe that these crises and other priorities demand urgent and comprehensive action to ensure a prosperous, fair, and sustainable future for all Canadians. However, this fall's economic statement has demonstrated once again that the Liberals are out of touch and unable to respond to the realities that Canadians are experiencing. What they have offered today is totally unresponsive to the crises facing our country. They are simply too weak, too self-interested, too full of infighting, and too beholden to corporate interests to fight for people. On the other hand, the Conservatives offer no solutions, only a discredited agenda of cuts to services people rely on and tax breaks for their friends and ultra-wealthy. They're happy to reinforce disingenuous and insulting characterizations of our country from foreign leaders like Donald Trump, while ignoring the real needs and challenges faced by Canadians. The Conservative approach undermines our values and fails to provide the support and investment required to build a fairer, more prosperous society. Madam Speaker, when he was senator, Joe Biden famously said, "Don't tell me your values, show me your budget, and I'll tell you your values." Well, Liberal and Conservative values are very clear to Canadians who've been paying attention to the federal government for the last 25 years. They continually, consistently prioritize the interests of the wealthy and corporate sector over the interests of working and middle-class Canadians. And New Democrats say that's wrong and there's a better way. For our part, New Democrats are proposing a robust set of policies designed to tackle these challenges head on. Let's review some of the key NDP proposals that ought to have been included in the fall economic statement. With millions of Canadians struggling to make ends meet, the NDP pledged to permanently remove the GST from daily essentials and monthly bills, such as all grocery store items, internet, home phone and cell phone bills, home heating, diapers, children's clothing. We believe that Canadians deserve a tax cut that will bring immediate and permanent relief. The GST is a structurally regressive tax that puts a burden on many Canadian households, particularly those who do not receive any rebate. By making it permanent, the NDP knows that Canadians can count on a predictable reduction in costs of 5% on the bills that they face every month and they can't avoid, with a measure that businesses can easily administer. Unfortunately, last week, both the Conservatives and the Liberals voted no to the NDP's motion to permanently scrap the GST on daily essentials and monthly bills.
Shame.
Axe the tax indeed, Madam Speaker. It seems the only tax the Conservatives want to axe is when it's given to the corporate sector. But when there's a tax cut proposed by the NDP for working and middle-class Canadians, they vote no. That's a shame.
That's right.
I think this is a prime illustration, Madam Speaker, of what Senator Biden, now President Biden, meant of where Liberal and Conservative priorities really lie, where their values really are. New Democrats believe a youth climate corps would help address both the climate emergency and Canada's youth employment crisis by providing young people with the skills and job experience they need. The NDP's Youth Climate Corps would provide participants with a decent wage and practical training while they engage in work across 3 critical areas: emergency response in the face of extreme weather events such as wildfires, flooding, and heat domes; strengthening community and environmental resilience to climate change by enhancing natural ecosystems, improving local infrastructure, and strengthening community supports in anticipation of climate disruptions; and third, building infrastructure that drives down greenhouse gas emissions. Now, this measure will be of particular assistance in Canada's rural and remote areas, places that especially need our support and development. New Democrats believe that the federal government should accelerate and expand the Canada Public Transit Fund to enhance public transportation infrastructure across the country. We also have proposed the establishment of a Crown Corporation to enhance and make sure that people in rural and remote areas have regular intercity bus service between their communities and major urban centers, because they deserve public transportation as well. By investing in public transit, we can reduce traffic congestion, lower greenhouse gas emissions, and provide Canadians with reliable and affordable transportation options. After decades of neglect, the federal government must support the construction of non-market housing of all types, including community, nonprofit, and cooperative housing, at the scale and speed needed to meaningfully address the housing crisis. I'm shocked to not see profound investment in this area in this fall economic statement. New Democrats believe we should begin by doubling the percentage of Canada's non-market housing stock to meet the OECD average, which shockingly we fall significantly below. By increasing the availability of affordable housing, we can alleviate the burden on low and middle income families, reduce homelessness, and ensure that all Canadians have access to safe and stable housing. By substantially increasing the amount of non-market housing stock, we can also reduce demand in the market supply, which will reduce market prices and make home ownership available to more Canadians. Now, the federal government must also take immediate steps to end the financialization of housing, such as by ending the tax exemption for real estate investment trusts. This measure will help curb speculative investments in the housing market, ensuring that homes are treated as places to live rather than commodities to make money off of. Madam Speaker, I think it's trite to say that a healthy population is essential for economic success. The federal government must take strong action to protect our public healthcare system by enhancing patient care, reversing privatization, and addressing the health human resources crisis. Federal funding transfers must be tied to the public delivery of healthcare services, and the Canada Health Act must be robustly enforced in the face of attacks from conservative premiers who want to gut public services and privatize delivery, both of which will make healthcare more expensive and less available to all. The federal government should also fulfill its commitment to establish a dedicated mental health transfer, provided targeting funding to expand desperately needed mental health services across the country. Madam Speaker, mental health is as vital as is physical health. It is essential to expand access to public addictions treatment and other life-saving services addressing the urgent needs of those affected by the toxic drug crisis and other substance use disorders. On the revenue side, Madam Speaker, New Democrats believe that fair taxation is essential to provide revenue for the services Canadians depend on and to ensure a sustainable fiscal framework. We note that the former finance minister blew through 2 of her 3 so-called financial guardrails, both last year and this year, and likely next year as well. And that's because they refuse to address fair taxation in this country. A key component of this is an excess profits tax on large corporations who have abused their monopoly positions in the marketplace and taken advantage of Canadians. Since 2021, increased corporate profit margins have significantly contributed to high levels of inflation and growing income inequality across the country. Despite the normalization of supply chains and easing of shortages today, Canadian corporations have maintained stratospheric profit levels and sky-high prices from everything from food to energy to rent. To add insult to injury, inflated profits have not translated into increased investment in the Canadian economy. Instead, they have largely been used for share repurchases and dividends, without contributing to wage growth or productive investment. Despite large corporate tax cuts and other corporate-friendly policies, Canadian businesses have demonstrably failed to invest in the machinery, equipment, innovation, and training that are so needed to set the basis for increased Canadian productivity. Madam Speaker, New Democrats believe it's time we tied all corporate incentivization programs to clear commitments to investments in the Canadian economy. Now, advancing Indigenous reconciliation is both a moral and economic imperative. According to a recent report from the Assembly of First Nations and Indigenous Services Canada, it will cost $349 billion to close the Indigenous infrastructure gap by 2030. However, the report also found that closing that infrastructure gap could generate $635 billion in economic output over the next 7 years. Increased funding for education, healthcare, housing, infrastructure, and clean water in Indigenous communities, supporting Indigenous land rights and self-governance, and implementing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action and the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls calls for justice will help us unlock the potential that exists in Canada's Indigenous communities. Now, recent developments in the United States make it clear that Canada needs a comprehensive green industrial policy and a resilient trade strategy to secure our long-term economic prosperity and sustainability. This shift will not only help Canada meet its climate goals, but also create high-quality jobs and stimulate economic growth. A renewed trade policy would protect Canadian industries from the volatility of international shock and external pressures, making Canada more self-reliant. As the COVID-19 pandemic highlighted, Canada currently lacks the capacity to produce essential items during a time of crisis, such as masks, ventilators, and vaccines, underscoring the need for greater self-sufficiency to critical sectors. The recent comments from the president-elect south of the border provide us with an historical opportunity to diversify our trade markets, including in Europe and Asia Pacific, taking better advantage of CETA and trade agreements that include Asian tigers like Japan and South Korea. They also should compel us to embark on a serious Made in Canada policy, using government procurement measures and incentives geared to national self-sufficiency in key areas. If the United States can have a Buy America program, so should Canada have a Buy Canadian program, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the crises we face are daunting, but they are not insurmountable. With bold, progressive, and forward-thinking policies, we can build a stronger, fairer economy that benefits all Canadians. New Democrats believe in a Canada where everyone can thrive, where science and compassion are at the heart of our policies, and where we invest in our future to build an equitable, sustainable society. We are ready to lead with a vision that puts people first. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Before I go to questions and comments, I do want to recognize that it's the birthday of one of our colleagues. The honourable member for Humber River Black Creek is, I won't say her age today, but I think, you know, for the amount of time that she has been here, length of time and her age, I think that it's quite an honour and a privilege to have her as an MP here in the House. Questions and comments. The honourable member for South Shore, South Shore St. Margaret.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I did listen to the member's speech. I do believe we're debating the privilege motion on the Liberal Green Slush Fund. I actually didn't hear the Liberal Green Slush Fund or SDTC in the speech. I heard a lot of other things that seemed more like a budget speech. So I'd like to ask the honourable member why his party continues to vote for this government when the Deputy Prime Minister won't even support her own Prime Minister, or the former Deputy Prime Minister, when in this case, we know that the Auditor General found that almost $400 million was funneled to companies of Liberal insiders, yet the member didn't speak to that issue at all, or whether or not he will support the idea that this House passed, that it is paramount that all documents be unredacted and released. Otherwise, the government is in total disregard of the role of Parliament and the 600-year history of our power to request documents.
Vancouver Kingsway.
Well, thank you to my honourable colleague for that question. He raised the question of what we're voting for. Well, I and my New Democratic colleagues give a little sample of what we voted for. We voted to bring dental care to 9 million Canadians.
You're here. That's right.
We voted to bring diabetes medications and devices and contraception devices to 10 million Canadians. We have voted to bring a school nutrition food program to schools in this country. We have voted to permanently remove the GST off life essentials on monthly expenses that Canadians have to pay and can't avoid. We have voted to have 10 paid sick days for every Canadian working in this country. The question I have from my honourable colleague is why did they vote against those things?
That's right. Order, order, order. The honourable member had an opportunity to ask a question. If he has another one, he needs to stand when required, when the proper time is. Questions and comments, the honourable member for Fleetwood Port Kells.
Oh, thank you, Madam Speaker. And to previous comments, by the way, some of us reach an age where we express our age in Celsius. So it works that way. It works for us. To the honourable member, you know, I appreciate the you know, the latitude he took with his comments. And I guess the question I would have for him, we've heard an awful lot from the opposition about the carbon tax and the horrible burden that it's placing on the cost of everything. And yet every reasonable economist in the land says that that's simply not the case. Perhaps he could explain where the NDP is on that specific issue.
Honourable member Vancouver Kingsway.
Well, thank you, my honourable colleague. If we're speaking of latitude, in my 16 years in this place, I've never seen such latitude given to a government in terms of presenting a fall economic statement, which is basically to table it outside and then run for the hills and not be present in the House to actually present the document. That's showing latitude, I think, to a government. But in terms of the carbon tax, look, the New Democrats have for many decades been very concerned about the climate crisis. We were warning about this decades ago. We have always called for an effective price on pollution, and we've always supported effective policies, whether that's a carbon tax or whether that's a cap and trade system or whether that's regulation of industries or, frankly, incentivizing the production of renewable energy in this country. I think that our record in terms of dealing seriously and responsibly with the climate crisis is second to none. What my disappointment is that after 9 years with this government, I have not seen meaningful progress in reducing Canada's carbon emissions. And I think the question that he has to answer is, why is that? Why has his government failed so terribly in meeting our international commitments, whether that's Kyoto or Paris? Because we have a whole generation of Canadians.
Questions and comments? L'honorable député de
Honourable Member for Shefford. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm a little bit perturbed what I'm hearing in this House today. The NDP had the opportunity to help people who really needed it by continuing to support us with our bill to increase OIS. But instead of this, they continued to prop up this government that spent way too much with measures that aren't really helping people. And our leader said this at one point. This is a difficult marriage. And the finance minister found this relationship with the NDP a little bit heavy at one point. So now we are in an impasse. We want to help people. We have a measure that could have cost much less than the affordability one. And when it comes to dental care, even last Friday, there were people at my office that were criticizing this. Well, Madam Speaker, why we're continuing to support a fully dysfunctional government, we should be asking the Prime Minister to resign. This doesn't make sense. The Honourable Member for Vancouver Kingsway.
For that question, I will join issue with her on one thing, and that is we also believe that this Prime Minister should resign. And our leader has called for that very thing today. You know, New Democrats have 25 MPs in this House. My honourable colleague is a member of the Bloc Québécois. They have, I think, 33 seats. They have more seats than we do. And what have the New Democrats accomplished in this Parliament since 2021? Well, again, today, as of today, 3 million Canadians have signed up and are receiving dental care in this country because of the efforts of the NDP. Agreements with British Columbia, Manitoba, and I understand almost every other province are well underway to ensure that people can walk into a pharmacy and walk out with the contraception and diabetes medications that they believe. That's what the NDP did. We worked to obtain $1 billion to help kids across this country get access to a nutritious school meal every day. That makes a difference. My honourable colleague, after we withdrew from our confidence and supply agreement, the Bloc Québécois attempted to make a deal with this government. They failed. So they've achieved nothing in this Parliament for anybody. So I would stack the New Democrats' record of accomplishment and achievement in this House, in this Parliament, against anybody. We have helped millions of Canadians in a practical and pragmatic way, including millions of people in Quebec.
questions and comments. The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Sure. I want to start by saying thank you to the member for Vancouver Kingsway for the amount of his speech that he dedicated to addressing the housing crisis. It's clear that he and the NDP are serious when it comes to addressing the housing crisis. He talked about the need to double social housing across the country. He likely knows that one of the reasons this government has been unable to do so is that they have, or CMHC has a definition for housing that isn't actually being used in the various programs it operates. In fact, in today's fall economic statement, there is accelerated funds for a program that only 3% of which actually delivers anything that helps those who are in core housing need. Can I understand better through you? I'd appreciate understanding from him his extent to which he is similarly concerned with CMHC not using the right definition for housing and how addressing that could help address the need to get more affordable housing built.
Honourable Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you for that question. You know, the housing crisis that we experienced in 2024 did not develop yesterday. It didn't develop in the last 5 years. This has developed over decades of successive conservative liberal governments, beginning in the early 90s, when the liberals and conservatives cut CMHC's investment in social housing in this country. That was the start of the long slide. And that's why Canada today is so far below the OECD's averages of the percentage of our housing that is social housing. Now, we can blame CMHC, but to me, the buck stops with the government.
Always.
The policies of the government are the ones that should be driving CMHC. The Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation is a Crown corporation that should be fully driven towards producing a house for every single Canadian in this country that needs one. You know, we all represent ridings in this country. We deal with thousands of issues, but some are foundational. And in my view, housing is a foundational issue. It anchors you in community. It's what makes your ability to work and access schools and connect with community possible. And when you don't have access to a secure, affordable, decent house, your rights as a citizen are seriously abridged. And only New Democrats, I believe, are capable of making sure that CMHC.
Sorry, I just want to add one more question here. Questions and comments. The honourable for Port Moody, Coquitlam.
Thank you so much, Madam Speaker. I just want. Thank you so much, Madam Speaker, and I just want to thank my colleague from Vancouver Kingsway for really sharing to this House all of the fantastic work that the NDP did for Canadians, all of those programs for Canadians. I wonder if the member wouldn't mind letting Canadians know what the Conservatives have not delivered in this House in 3 years.
The honourable member for Vancouver Kingsway, a brief answer.
Thank you. I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for all of her work. She has been a crusading force in this House for fighting for people with disabilities, including getting a meaningful Canada disability benefit. And she continues to fight for that. In a word, I guess the shorter list is to explain what the Conservative opposition has obtained for Canadians in this House, this Parliament, and the answer to that would be nothing.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Sandwich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's an honor to rise at this moment and debate in the ongoing motion of privilege. I want to start by letting you know, Madam Speaker, that I'll be splitting my time with the honourable member for Kitchener Centre. I'm aware that as I begin this, being a stickler for the rules, today seems to be a day that all the rules are going right out the window. I noticed the honourable member for South Shore St. Margaret noted that the member for Vancouver Kingsway had not spoken to the motion that is before us. I think that's consistent with the 20 minutes that the leader of the official opposition took to give his speech, which also made no reference to Sustainable Development Technology Canada, nor the motion of privilege, nor the return of documents, because through a series of, I have to say, ill-considered, not necessarily ill-intentioned, but certainly disrespectful decisions that were occasioned by the unanticipated and I'm sure shocking events of the day in terms of how they affected the Liberal caucus, the planned tabling of the fall economic statement, the planned opportunity to hear the Minister of Finance, then Deputy Prime Minister, explain what was in that document, explain to us how the guardrails of deficits above $40 billion had been breached, explain to us what was in there and what wasn't in there, and then to allow each party in this place, including the Green Party, to have a right of response, to take questions and so on. All of that went out the window. So as it turns out, and I am a stickler for the rules, so Madam Speaker, I'm about to say in the next 8 minutes I have before turning the floor over to my honourable colleague, that nothing I'm going to say is relevant to the matter that's before the House for orders of the day. And I apologize, but this is my one opportunity to say some things that I think need saying. I want to say on the floor of this place, as we normally would in a circumstance where someone who has served on the front benches of this place as a cabinet minister since 2015, who has now left that cabinet suddenly, unexpectedly. I don't agree with much of what that member for University Rosedale put forward over the years, but I respect her enormously. And it is a really lousy thing. I don't know what word. It's graceless, it's crass, it's unbecoming to our tradition as parliamentarians that someone as fine as a member for University Rosedale would leave the cabinet, leave being Deputy Prime Minister, leave being Minister of Finance, having previously been Minister of International Trade, having played a really large role in getting this country through our first encounter with a Trump presidency, having played a rather large role in negotiating and renegotiating NAFTA, now CUSMA, so that Canada ended up whole. And in fact, I think better, because we got rid of the energy clause and the what was then Chapter 11 investor state provisions of what was NAFTA, now CUSMA. That same member of Parliament for University Rosedale, in terms of good or bad luck for a government to have an expert, the member for University Rosedale was, as far as I know, the first Canadian banned from Russia by Vladimir Putin, because before entering politics, she had a job. She was a journalist and she was based in Moscow, and she did not write flattering puff pieces about Mr. Putin. She told the truth, and as a result, I think she risked her life, and she certainly did not earn any bonus points. Mr. Putin decided to name her specifically as someone not welcome in Russia. Now, I have had that honor since that time, since Russia invaded Ukraine, and since Greens have stood up with the rest of this parliament in defending Ukraine and in urging that we do everything we can to stop the brutality of the Russian invasion. I eventually got listed as one of those not welcome in Russia, but I'm a Johnny-come-lately to the honor. The member for University Rosedale has it hands down on the bravery of living in Moscow and doing that work as a journalist. And the member for University Rosedale played a large role in navigating us through COVID. So as much as Canada emerged from the COVID pandemic a different country, fractured, and I think we suffer from I love a group of psychiatrists, psychologists, and experts to figure it out. We're more divided than we used to be. And yet we got through COVID with half the death rate of our neighbors south of the border. And we got through it using benefits that actually, for the first time in the history of this country, that actually reduced childhood poverty. There is much to be said about the honourable member for University Rosedale, and I just wanted to say publicly in this place, thank you to the honourable member. I argued with her many times about climate policy, but there's a fine public servant there sitting as the member of Parliament for University Rosedale, and today was not a good day for any kind of gracious acknowledgement of a role that somebody played across the aisles. Pour moi, je veux dire un grand merci à
I would like to thank the member for University Rosedale. She did a remarkable job during very difficult times, during crises like the war that the Russians brought on Ukraine and the pandemic.
It was not a good day for us in this place because I think it was a contempt. That without any by your leave, the fall economic statement was dropped, and I have a lot of respect for the government House Leader. She wasn't prepared to deliver a speech nor to take questions, but I think it was, again, classless and disrespectful that we weren't allowed to give a round of speeches on what we thought of the document, having been briefly exposed to it in the shortest lockup in history over any budgetary document. Usually we're given the better part of a day and time to ask questions. We got the document at about 1:30, 1:45. I had to run back here for a question period. I'm not looking for sympathy about how fast we had to work and how hard we had to read, because there was so little there. But that doesn't matter when you and I won't pick it. The exemption on props, Madam Speaker, is if you're speaking to the document itself. So this document itself takes.
She's not to point to a document that she's holding. She can reference it, but she can't be pointing at it. The honourable member, the honourable parliamentary the honourable member for Sandwich Gulf Islands.
Madam Speaker, you learn something new every day. I understood that it was an exemption on the rule on props if you're actually speaking to that document. For Canadians in floodplains. and to keep them out of quote unquote harm's way. That's not going to be a solution to the galloping climate crisis and the number of Canadians whose life and limb are at risk from the variety of climate crises which are upon us, whether extreme flooding events, atmospheric rivers, heat domes, such as the one that killed 619 British Columbians in 4 days in the summer of 2021, nor extreme events like Hurricane Fiona or the derechos that devastated parts of Ottawa, storms that we didn't even know had names, increased tornadoes, increased floods, droughts, extreme weather events of all kinds. Yet very little is said for Canadians to make us feel safer in our homes or to make us think the government understands what that crisis really looks like when you live through it. And we live through more all the time. Wildfire events, extremely bad for your health, extremely hard to have to breathe the smoke from fires that come at all times of year. Madam Speaker, in the minute or so that I have left, let me say that while this fall economic statement in its substance was extremely disappointing, in the way in which it was dropped on us, in the lack of accountability for fiscal promises made and broken, this is a low ebb for the government of Canada. I wish the best to the new Minister of Finance. I hope someone will take responsibility. Accountability is sorely lacking in all corners of our institutions across Canada, into provinces. We need to take responsibility for our actions, be accountable, and say when we've made a mistake, and be honest with Canadians about how we plan to do better, what we plan to do. It's not enough to have rhyming slogans. You need policies and programs, and you need to be serious about the work at hand, because Canadians are serious, honest, hardworking people, and they need to know that their members of parliament are working for them, not just to prop up one color-coded team against another. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, all morning, since 10 o'clock this morning, I've been hearing a great deal of discussion about the fall economic statement. And as the member herself admits, you know, even with the privilege that's before us, virtually all speeches, whether it's pre 2 o'clock or post the tabling of the document, have been on the budget and that's, or the fall economic statement. That's not necessarily my question, however. Madam Speaker, one of the slogans that the Conservatives have is saying we are going to fix the budget. Fix the budget for many Canadians, including myself, means the government, a Conservative government, would in fact look at cutting things such as the National Disability Program that we put into place, the National Child Care Program that we put into place, the National Pharmacare Program that we put into place, the National Dental Care Program that we put into place, the National School Food Program. And so whenever they use the slogan, fix the budget, does the member have any concerns in regards to what is actually meant when they say that?
Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Well, we actually don't know what is meant by that, because to me, fixing the budget is to get a balanced budget. We know it will take some time, but the Greens have been advocating that if you want to balance your spending with your revenues, you should go for where the money is, which is the billionaire class, big banks, big oil, big grocery chains that have been reaping in excess profits over the last number of years. Now, it is true, when I asked this question in question period last week, Minister for Finance at the time, former Minister for Finance, said that this government introduced an excess profit tax on banks and insurance companies, but it's a very small one. And it did not apply to oil and gas. It did not apply to grocery chains. And it did not apply to a wealth tax, because we have seen a massive increase in the number of billionaires in this country. They're very nice people, I'm sure, but I'd like to see them taxed enough, not to be cruel, but to reduce them to mere millionaires.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for St. John Rossi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my friend, Leader of the Green Party, for her speech. One thing I get a lot in the riding from constituents and people that are following this is about security clearance. And I know the leader of the Green Party did get her security clearance, and duly so. The leader of the NDP got his security clearance. The leader of the Bloc got his security clearance. And of course, the Prime Minister has his security clearance. There's one leader who doesn't have a security clearance, and that is the leader of the opposition. And a lot of my constituents are simply asking why? Why not just get it, put out that fire and move on? But he continues to avoid getting it. So my question to the leader of the Green Party is, why?
The member for Sandwich Gulf Islands.
To my friend from St. John Ross, it's one small factoid correction. It's true the Prime Minister of this country has his security clearance, but he gets it by right when he became Prime Minister. Never actually had to go through the process that I've gone through, the leader of the Democratic Party, le chef de Bloc québécois. Et c'est une bonne question.
And that's an excellent question. It's such an important question. Why the leader of the official opposition has refused to ask for the process to start.
Can think of is that he's worried he won't get it because you don't get it by right. And I urge the leader of the official opposition to remove the doubt for Canadians that there's something about his history, potentially with foreign interference or something else, that means he worries he won't get top secret security clearance if he were to ask for it.
Brief question, the honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In the member from Sandwich Gulf Islands speech, she talked about what we could be doing if we were to really tax the wealthiest. And I know she believes one of the things we could be doing is lift folks with disabilities out of poverty. I used to say this government was going to do this vote buying scheme, and maybe it's just the Prime Minister who is planning on doing it. That vote buying scheme left out folks with disabilities, just as this fall economic statement did. Can she comment on how important it is to lift folks with disabilities out of poverty and how this statement could have been a place to do it?
Brief answer from the honourable member for Sandwich Gulf Islands.
We're a rich country, Madam Speaker. Thanks to my honourable friend for Kitchener Centre for reminding us that we have an obligation as a country to have essential fairness. The people with disabilities have a disproportionate rate of poverty. But why do we have people living in tent cities? Why are we allowing people to live in conditions that are inhumane in a country that could afford a guaranteed livable income for all?
And I want to correct my record on that one, on the previous point that I brought forward about the document. So I did check on that, and Speaker Milliken had ruled on this in the past, where if it's a document that had just been tabled in the House, it could be referenced and have it in hand while referencing. The honourable member for Kitchener Centre resuming debate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and merci à mes collègues. I'll start by saying I want to recognize, as my friend from Sandwich Gulf Island did, on the point of relevance, that I'll be focusing my speech on the fall economic statement as opposed to what we really should be doing, which is focusing on this amendment if we were to follow exactly the orders of the day. I recognize it's been about 3 months of talking about this particular motion. In fact, as you know, I've shared a few times how we've had a number of speakers on this. The number of Conservative speakers alone are 223 or so. And so I have spoken quite a bit to this motion already to make clear Greens supported back in June the support of the precedent to this motion. That continues to be the case. My second apology is things have been so last minute and kind of disjointed today. I would usually even send notes for a speech like this to translators. Apologies to them. I haven't actually done that tonight either. But I do think it's important to take every opportunity I can to speak out for the concerns and the priorities of folks in my community. And this is an important moment to do so. Because of course, like many in this place and across the country, I'm troubled by the events of today, but more so I'm troubled by the statement that we were provided with just this afternoon, the fall economic statement. Because the reality is that folks in my community are in a time of crisis. We look at it's 40% of those living in poverty are folks with disabilities. That should not be the case in a country as wealthy as ours. In my community, I've spoken quite a bit about the number of people who are living unsheltered at a time when rents have doubled in my community in recent years. The number of people living unsheltered tripled from 2018 to 2021, from just over 300 to over 1,000. And with the most recent point and count study, nearly tripled again to over 2,300. Meanwhile, we continue to be the only country in the G7 whose emissions have risen since 1990. We are in a closing window of opportunity to act on the climate crisis. It's because of these significant crises that are facing folks in my community and those across the country that Greens proposed a number of constructive solutions that could have been in the fall economic statement. I'll go over a few of those now with the time I have here. We could first of all start with fixing the Canada Disability Benefit and following through on the promise this government made to folks with disabilities to lift hundreds of thousands of people with disabilities out of poverty. This was another moment missed for this government to follow through on doing so. Also, of course, this is a moment where they could have addressed the housing crisis that we are in. Greens have been calling for this government to get towards a plan to double social housing across the country. If they did so, we'd go from the bottom to just the middle of the pack in the G7. One of the ways we've proposed they do so is in a new motion I've put forward to require CMHC to have two income-based definitions of affordable housing to ensure when they talk about funds like the Affordable Housing Fund, that money is actually going to build affordable housing, housing that would support people who are in core housing need, relying on the research by housing experts like Dr. Carolyn Weitzman and others across the country. We've been calling on them to address the loopholes for large corporate landlords who are buying up housing in my community, raising rents, and profiteering off of our homes. With those funds, we could then turn and address a gap in HST that was exempted for for-profit developers of rental housing to ensure that nonprofit builders of affordable home ownership, like Habitat for Humanity, they could have been HST exempt, and we can pay for it, as I mentioned, by taxing real estate investment trusts like other corporations, for example. These are the kinds of housing solutions we'd put forward to be in the fall economic statement. We'd also had been calling for this government to get serious about funds to support harm reduction and other programs to support people who are using drugs who are dying from poisoned drugs. In my community, I haven't looked at the numbers today, it was at least 72 people when I last checked had died in Waterloo Region from poison drugs. And there is a federal funding mechanism called the Substance Use and Addictions Program. Greens had been calling for that program to be better funded so that communities like Waterloo Region would get their fair share of funding. To date, we've received $0 in Waterloo Region from this really critical program to support organizations like Sanguine and Community Health Caring to provide supports that keep people alive, because while treatment is important, a person who's dead can't get to treatment. We need to provide a suite of supports that include mental health and housing and treatment and harm reduction along with safe supply. That's part of what Greens had been calling for. Of course, Greens had also been talking about revenue tools to fund solutions. One of those revenue tools is a windfall profit tax. Because while there's a lot of talk in this place about the carbon tax going up 2 cents a liter in 2022 and in years since, in 2022, the profits of the oil and gas industry went from some 26 cents a liter to around 44 or so, an increase of 18 cents a liter, all of which went to their profits, ended up around, I think 66 billion or so for the top 5 oil and gas companies operating in Canada. It's clear those companies are gouging Canadians while their emissions go up. They are responsible for the largest share of emissions while we're in a climate crisis. This government has put in place a windfall profit tax. They called it the Canada Recovery Dividend. They applied it on banks and life insurance companies in the midst of the pandemic. As Greens, all we've been saying is now do oil and gas. I put forward a motion to propose doing so. The PBO has costed it. With a windfall profit tax on profits above $1 billion, even just a 15% tax on profits above $1 billion, this government could generate $4.2 billion a year. those are the funds that could be used to invest in public transit, for example, rather than seeing local councils like the region of Waterloo talking about cutting public transit routes or increasing fares. The federal government could be showing up with the dollars to help them make sure that high school students, for example, could get lower or no fares. We could also see the federal government step up for the permanent public transit fund to be put in place sooner than 2026, after the next election, to provide not only infrastructure, but also maintenance, money for mechanics, for example. This is what we'd called for, that windfall profit tax could be used for, along with retrofit funding to help Canadians who want to look at installing retrofits in their homes that would reduce their emissions and save them money. That program had expired February of this year. We'd put forward for them to renew that program in a significant way, to look at, $50,000 for Canadians who want to look at retrofitting their homes. We'd been calling for this government to invest in closing the infrastructure gap. At 6 Nations of the Grand River, for example, it continues to be the case that 70% of those living on reserve don't have access to clean drinking water, and their infrastructure gap is around $1.6 billion. This was an opportunity to close that infrastructure gap. Of course, we've also been calling for more equity in federal arts funding, because in communities like mine and many others across the country, while the Canada Council for the Arts has lost funding since the pandemic, about $140 million lost, communities like mine have continued to be historically underfunded. We get about $3 a person, whereas places like Montreal, Vancouver, Winnipeg average around $18 a person or so. Greens had been calling for this fall economic statement to provide a new mechanism to ensure funding is more equitable across the country, and that those funds would be restored to previous levels. What do we get instead after all these calls had been made? Well, when it comes to home retrofits, rather than actually delivering funds, they talk about interest-free loans. Apparently all the money was gone to the billions they're sending to carbon capture, the tens of billions, so much that I can't even keep track. Environmental Defense has been doing their best to do so. They know it's about 18 billion or so in fossil fuel subsidies. Certainly not always the case that they get loans. But when it comes to Canadians who want to retrofit their homes, I guess loans are going to have to continue to do. On housing, they're actually talking about accelerating more funds into the apartment construction loan program. This is a program that only 3% of funds are actually going to those in core housing need. Again, if they don't actually address the underlying definitions of these funds, accelerating more dollars to them isn't going to help address the housing crisis in a substantial way. And when it comes to the Canada Disability Benefit, rather than actually addressing the core issue, they're talking about ensuring it's tax-free, which for many was the assumption would always be the case. What we need is to see this government recognize that for so many across the country, folks are feeling in my community like the promise of what Canada could be is being lost. And they need to step up to restore hope and a sense that we can get back to that sense of what's possible for young Canadians and others across the country.
The honourable member will have 5 minutes of questions and comments the next time this matter is before the House. Alors, à ce moment-ci, conformément...
Pursuant to Standing Order 38, a motion to adjourn the House is deemed to have been made and seconded at this time. Therefore, the question is that this House do now adjourn.
The honourable member... Oh, there he is. Okay, the honourable member for Bow River.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Sorry to be invisible to you tonight. Not often the case.
You're not invisible.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to speak again on an important, very important topic, carbon tax and the policies that affect agriculture. Carbon tax is a huge one. The capital gains, which was supposedly for some kind of elite businesses, but it really does affect the businesses, the family farm businesses, the capital gains tax, which is another one that's a very significant challenge. It just goes along with like the GST tax break that they found is not getting them any bump because it isn't one that works either. But there's some information on the carbon tax. The average 5,000 acre farm in Canada was paying about $150,000 every single year in carbon taxes. If you're an irrigation country, that multiplies at least to another 100,000. I know my colleague will suggest other forms of energy, but natural gas and propane, natural gas in particular, that creates power, is what's used in our part of the world. For greenhouses, which I have significant ones in tomatoes, green peppers, lettuce, strawberries, they're facing huge costs, 22 million a year in carbon tax, and by 2030, it'll be 82 to 100 million. That's a huge cost on greenhouse produce of vegetables in our country. We have 44% of fresh fruit and vegetable growers already telling us they're selling at a loss, and their statements show it. 77% of them cannot cover their production costs, and we have 77% of produce growers in Canada close to going under. Alberta farmers paid 17 million carbon tax last year just on natural gas and propane to dry their grain and to heat and cool their barns. Well, Bill C-234, which would have eliminated the carbon tax on natural gas and propane, saving farmers that billion a year, well, the senators have gutted that bill. But we have ways that we can work with this. And some people don't get what we have as institutions. The University of Alberta, and this is from the president of the University of Alberta, we understand energy, we understand innovation, and after more than a century of energy breakthroughs, we've learned the key of success. When you bring together the right people, you push the boundaries of innovation. The Alberta-based project brings together...
Sorry, the honourable member's phone, I think, is vibrating, and yeah, there you go. The honourable member for Bow River, yeah.
Thank you. They understand that Alberta-based project brings together academia, industry, government to advance solutions that will reduce carbon dioxide emissions and diversify the economy. So we have ways that we can work with the energy sector, work with emissions. We have great academic institutions like the University of Alberta who can bring people together to work on this. But there's some other costs that are really interesting. At the Ag Committee recently, CN Rail was there and they were asked about carbon tax. And in Saskatchewan, CN said the carbon tax bill was 36 million just for transporting the produce out of Saskatchewan. Now, if you multiply that by Alberta and Manitoba, and the question was asked, well, then you pay the carbon tax. And CN said, well, of course not. We just download that to the farmers. Absolutely. That's the problem, that the carbon tax will be downloaded. These are not rebate operations. There's no rebate for these large farm operations. They're the ones that do a great job of producing great food security, but food produced in Canada, and they are being taxed severely, and it's a challenge with the carbon tax, and they need to be stopped. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change and to the Minister of Sports and Physical Activity.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's nice to be here in a German debate with my colleague from Bow River. But unfortunately, once again tonight, my colleague over there is spreading misinformation about carbon pricing to discredit the system, and that's misleading Canadians. Just very recently, the Agriculture Producers Association of Saskatchewan estimated that a large 5,000 acre farm spends around $10,000 a year on carbon pricing. And that member just said it's $150,000, Madam Chair. They go on to suggest that these costs can be mitigated with changes to some of the fuels that they use, because as they know, the vast majority, about 90% of our on-farm fuels are exempt from carbon pricing, Madam Chair. I come from a family of apple farmers. Obviously, there's no grain drying involved in apple farming, but I am the member of parliament for a semi-rural riding. We have poultry farms, we have a mushroom farm, 2 mushroom farms, in fact. We have very large ag operations. We have beef farms, we have cattle, we have equine facilities, huge horse community. Actually, Milton, only just 25 years ago, had more horses than humans. But Madam Chair, the numbers, the raw data that the member was sharing is starkly in contrast to what the Agriculture Producers Association of Saskatchewan said. In fact, the number that he used was more than 15 times more than these farmers stated the costs were around. And those farmers also very clearly said, every farmer's goal, doesn't matter your political stripe or your commodity, is to leave the land that we all have in a better condition for the next generation. And he also added, we are not anti-carbon tax by any means. Madam Chair, we have a collective responsibility and obligation to ensure that food is affordable in Canada. And every time those Conservatives stand up in this House and blame carbon pricing for elevated food costs, they are straight up lying to Canadians. The evidence is very, very clear. Time after time, we see the facts come out that if we were to eliminate carbon pricing entirely in Canada, what we would see is less money in the pockets of lower and middle income Canadians, and we might see a grocery cart valued at $100 come down in cost by 50 cents. Madam Chair, it is not the cause of the affordability crisis that Canadians are experiencing. In fact, the number one cause that scientists, economists, and farmers have collectively identified as the cause for elevated food prices is climate change itself. The impacts of climate change and extreme weather through floods, through wildfires, through drought, and through all of the challenges that we're facing as we continue to burn more and more fossil fuels and emit more greenhouse gases into our atmosphere, which is causing extreme weather. And 2024 was once again the hottest year on record. The year that it broke was 2023. The year that 2023 broke was 2022. Wheat yields in Canada went down last year, and the number one cause was climate change, not carbon pricing. That member makes it very clear he wears his I love Canadian oil and gas tie in this House on a frequent basis. Madam Chair, we ought to be proud of our energy sector. We ought to support our energy sector and the workers within it. It has enhanced the wealth of our country, and that is a very, very important thing. But at the same time, we need to make sure that our oil and gas sector and our energy workers are innovating and providing solutions, lowering their emissions so that we're not contributing to climate change. And Madam Chair, I'd ask once again, the member opposite should cut with the misinformation. The number one cause of food inflation in the world is climate change, not carbon pricing. Carbon pricing is one of the best solutions for it.
The honourable member for Bow River.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At this time, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all those people in my riding who have supported me over the years. Really appreciate it. But it's the Christmas season, and I would like to wish all of those families, as they celebrate together, gather in communities, a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member, parliamentary secretary.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd also like to wish my colleague and friend from Bow River, who used to be a teacher and taught one of my former colleagues, my friend Shireen, school, and she always asks me how that member is doing, and I tell her we have lively debates into the wee hours sometimes, but I do genuinely appreciate the opportunity. I appreciate the opportunity to say Merry Christmas to my friend and to everybody in Calgary and around the Bow River area, of course. I'd also like to wish everybody in Canada a Merry Christmas at this time. I know that times can be tough, but we got solutions in Canada, and the member from Bow River and I can agree to disagree, but we're still friends. And, you know, as we gather around tables and have dinners and meals and celebrate together, let's put our differences aside, enjoy one another's company, and realize that we're better together than we are apart. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for St. Albert Edmonton.
Madam Speaker, for 54 days, the then Minister of Public Safety and current Minister of National Defence slow-walked a CSIS warrant. The subject of the warrant was none other than a former Ontario Liberal Cabinet Minister and top organizer and fundraiser for the Prime Minister in the GTA. This same former Liberal Cabinet Minister is also been someone long suspected of being involved in Beijing's interference activities on Canadian soil. At the public inquiry, national security officials testified that warrants of this kind are typically signed off by the minister between 4 and 10 days. Consistent with that, during the same time of this warrant, the minister signed off on 2 other warrants within 4 to 8 days. But when it came to a warrant involving a former Liberal cabinet minister and top organizer and fundraiser for the Prime Minister, it took 54 long days. Now, we know, based upon the evidence at the inquiry, that this was no accident. It's not as though the warrant application fell through the cracks on the minister's desk, which in and of itself would raise serious questions about the minister's competence. What happened was much more serious. There was a concerted effort within this government to slow walk the warrant into a Liberal kingpin. Here are the facts. The minister's chief of staff was given notice by CSIS that they intended to bring forward the warrant application in respect of the former Ontario Liberal minister. 2 weeks after the warrant sat on the minister's desk, CSIS followed up with the minister's chief of staff. The warrant continued to languish on the minister's desk for 30 more days. Indeed, it was not until the director of CSIS personally intervened did the minister finally sign off on the warrant. The question is why? What took so long? When I raised this question in the House during question period, I received a non-answer from the minister. The minister and his chief of staff testified at the public inquiry. At the inquiry, they provided no credible explanation for the delay. Canadians deserve answers about why it took 54 days in which national security may have been compromised. So I put it to the government. What is the explanation?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Rural Economic Development and the Minister responsible for the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure for me to rise today and to speak about the important issue of combating foreign interference in our democratic institutions. It's a little ironic for my colleague to talk about political interests in matters of national security when his leader still will not take his security clearance to learn more about foreign interference taking place in his party. Madam Speaker, since coming to office, our government has taken a range of measures to address the threats of foreign interference, such as amending the Canada Election Act in 2018, creating both the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency as well as the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, standing up to a range of initiatives to strengthen our electoral system against cyber and other threats through the plan to protect Canada's democracy in advance of the 2019 election, and building upon and further strengthening that plan to advance, of course, in the advance of the 2021 election. Ensure that key protections against foreign interference are not limited to the election period, banning intentionally false and misleading statements about election activities or the voting process to disrupt an election or its results, prohibiting contributions through money orders, prepaid gift cards, or crypto assets whose source can be difficult to trace. Introduce new third-party contribution rules to increase transparency and mitigate the so-called dark or foreign funds from entering the system. Madam Speaker, if passed, these amendments would continue the cycle of continuous improvements to Canada's electoral process. The members will have a chance to study, of course, the amendments proposed in C65, and we look forward to the discussion that will follow. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable for St. Albert Edmonton.
The parliamentary secretary acts as if the Liberals are bystanders, and yet we're talking about a specific warrant that sat on the minister's desk for 54 days, despite repeated attempts by CSIS to have the minister sign off on the warrant. And I simply asked for an explanation. Why did it happen? Isn't the reason it happened was because it was about protecting a liberal kingpin? It was about protecting someone who the Prime Minister saw as benefiting himself as being a liberal organizer and fundraiser for the Prime Minister? Isn't it the case that once again, this government put the partisan interests of the Liberal Party and the Prime Minister ahead of national security?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Madam Speaker, the government is committed to protecting and strengthening Canada's democracy. We look forward to the ongoing work of the public inquiry into foreign interference in the federal election process and democratic institution, including the Commissioner's final report in December 2024. The government will review the report in due course, of course. In the meantime, Madam Speaker, the government continues to take steps to counter foreign interference. This includes proposed amendments to the Election Act recently introduced through Bill C-65. Madam Speaker, I look forward to the ongoing engagement with the member of this House as we consider potential changes to further protect and strengthen our Canadian democracy. And I want to take the opportunity, of course, to wish my colleague and everybody in the House happy holidays, and we'll see you, of course, in the New Year.
The motion to adjourn the House is now deemed to have been adopted. Accordingly, this House stands adjourned until tomorrow at 10 a.m. pursuant to Standing Order 24-1.